At the beginning of written questions this morning, Deputy Ranif raised with me the form of the answer to written question 139, asked of the Minister for the Environment. The question, insofar as it is relevant to my deliberation, asks further to his answer to oral question 64 of 2025 in relation to the Residential Space Standard Supplementary Planning Guidance, SPG. Will the Minister, A, state what views, if any, were expressed by other ministers in relation to his review of the SPG in relation to very large homes? The answer to that part is as follows. As set out in Ministerial Decision MD ENV 2025-94, it is evident that the Minister for Housing provided comment in relation to the review of the 300 square foot parameter set out in supplementary planning guidance. This is set out in an appendix. I have considered the appendix, and it certainly makes reference to the fact that the Minister for Housing expressed a view. It does not say what those views were, nor does it say whether any other minister had any comment to make. It seems to me, to the extent it does not address that question head on, then it is not an adequate answer to the question, and accordingly I direct that there is an improved answer lodged by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Very well. We come now to public business. The first item of public business is the draft Westaway Trust Transfer of Assets Jersey Law P10, lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and the main responder is the Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Westaway Trust Transfer of Assets Jersey Law 2000, a law to provide for the transfer of the assets currently administered in accordance with the Westaway Trust Jersey Law 1930, the Le Don de Fay Fund, and for connected purposes. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, today I bring forward these changes to transfer the assets of the two Westaway funds, namely the Westaway Pauvre Honteux Fund and the Westaway École Élémentaire Fund, into Le Don de Fay Trust. This is a practical step which will ensure these funds continue to be utilised, respecting the wishes of the original settler, Miss Julia Westaway. The Westaway funds were established in 1930 as a result of the will of Miss Westaway, with the states agreeing to accept the assets and administer them for benevolent purposes. The funds created under the trust were designed to provide special relief for parishioners who met certain criteria through the Pauvre Honteux Fund, and supply clothing and shoes to children of families who met certain criteria through the École Élémentaire Fund. These funds were created with strict conditions. Their distributions are limited solely to income, and with assets of just £24,000 and £31,000 respectively, at the end of 2024, the distributable return has become negligible at less than £1,000 per year per fund, which is split across the 12 parishes. Restrictive terms of the fund have included limitations on the scope of the awards, that distribution is not to diminish capital, and that the awards should be distributed to parishes in proportion to their population. Unless we take action, these funds will remain largely dormant and unable to fulfil the fund's original purpose. The proposal here is relatively straightforward in that we transfer the full value of these funds into Le Don de Fay Trust. This trust already operates under similar principles with a link to the churches and distribution on a population-weighted basis to the rectors and church wardens of the 12 parishes to support parishioners who are in need. This trust, Le Don de Fay Trust, has a significantly larger asset base of some £1.8 million, enabling it to generate meaningful income for distribution, which will allow us to maintain the spirit of Miss Westaway's bequest. The immediate effect of this transfer will be a small but meaningful increase in each parish's distribution by approximately £200 per parish. By merging these funds, we achieve three key benefits. Firstly, we ensure the funds remain active. Instead of allowing them to stagnate due to insufficient income, this will integrate them into a larger fund that can make meaningful distributions. Secondly, it will maintain the spirit of the original bequest. The funds will still support those across our island's parishes, as Miss Westaway intended. And thirdly, it will improve financial efficiency. The assets will be invested in the States of Jersey Common Investment Fund, improving their potential returns. So this proposal has the full support of the Westaway Donations Council, which currently oversees the Westaway funds, the Treasurer of the State, who is responsible for overseeing all three funds, and the rectors and church wardens were consulted and raised no objections, and also the wider public through an advertised consultation in the Jersey Evening Post in January 2024. The direct control of these funds will remain at arm's length from ministers and officials, transferring from the Westaway Donations Council to the rectors and church wardens. So this proposal is not just a technical financial adjustment, it is about preserving the spirit of benevolent giving and ensuring that funds do not go to waste. The world has changed significantly since 1930, and it is our responsibility to ensure that benevolent trusts adapt to remain effective. By consolidating these funds into Le Don de Fay Trust, we are safeguarding their purpose for future generations while respecting the legacy of Miss Westaway. Sir, I commend this proposition to the Assembly. Thank you.
You move the principles. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Conitarbs St Helier.
Thank you, sir. I thought it would be appropriate for me to say a few words about Miss Westaway and to ask the States Assembly to recognise not only her generosity but also her bravery. And indeed, that was recognised at a recent event where we were focusing on women in Jersey who have made a great contribution to island life. As members will know, may know, Miss Westaway managed to withstand the bullying of her brother in regard to how the assets of the family which she inherited were to be spent. There was a contested will involved, which is of course always difficult and stressful. But she was determined that her family's money should go to charitable purposes. Some of the criteria that were established in the early years were a little strange. They involved shoes and they involved restricting it either to Catholic or Protestant children. I can't remember which it was. But notwithstanding that, she was a charitable lady. And I noticed also that she purchased the 1893 painting of the Assise d'Héritage by John St Helier Lander, a copy of which is still in the Royal Court. She was a generous patron of the island. And anyone who doesn't know what she looks like only has to go to the St Helier Town Hall Assembly Room, where there is a splendid painting of her, sort of in pride of place above the grand piano. In 2006, we recognised the centenary of the establishment of the Westaway Trust, and a plaque was laid in Don Street at Westaway Chambers, which was the home and birthplace of Julia Westaway. And at the same time, we did a book launch for local writer Daphne Noel's biography of Julia Westaway entitled The Poor Shall Inherit, which is a good read. And I would recommend that to members who would like to know more about Julia Westaway. And I hope that her her legacy and her reputation will be upheld even as the assets to the trust are transferred elsewhere. Thank you, sir.
Very well, Senator. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Well, sir, I'm grateful to the Constable of St Helier for telling us that information and background about Miss Westaway, which I have to confess I wasn't aware. So it's good to know that we can continue, if we adopt this proposition, we can continue her work. Yes, the original bequest was to benefit children of Protestant evangelical Protestant families, which is something that increasingly with time everyone involved has found difficult to do. Sir, I would like to maintain the principles, please, sir.
Do you call for the appeal?
I call for the appeal, yes, sir, please.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles, and I ask the referee to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the referee to close the voting. The principles have been adopted, 43 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Does the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, Deputy Miles, do you wish to call this in?
No, thank you, sir.
Then how do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading?
En bloc, sir, please.
Yes. You propose in second reading?
Yes, please, sir.
Are the articles seconded in second reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in second reading? Those in favour of adopting in second reading kindly show. That is called for. I don't need to invite members to return to their seats because they would already be here by now. I ask the referee to open the voting. The vote is in second reading, and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the referee to close the voting. And again, the articles were adopted in second reading, 43 votes for, no votes contra, no abstention. Do you move in third reading, Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
Is it seconded for third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Those in favour of adopting in third reading kindly show. Those against? It is adopted in third reading. Very well. The next item is the draft control of housing and work, residential and employment status Jersey regulations lodged by the Chief Minister. The main responder is the Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft control of housing and work, residential and employment status, Jersey Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Articles 2.6, 5.1, 17.1a, 19.3, 24.6, 27.6 and 44 of the Control of Housing and Work Jersey Law 2012.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Elves is acting as rapporteur for this item.
Very much. Deputy Elves.
Thank you, sir. As Assistant Chief Minister, I have the honour to hold responsibility for the control of housing and work legislation. Today, I hope that members will support my proposals for these draft control of housing and work, residential and employment status Jersey regulations. The draft regulations do not aim to break new ground. They aim to reinstate everything that we have already within the current control of housing and work, residential and employment status Jersey regulations 2013. Overall, the existing statuses are maintained, as is the current policy intent. The opportunity has been taken to update some areas, and a main aim within the changes has been to simplify the structure and language. The draft regulations also take the opportunity to be more generous in a small number of areas around relationships and family units. I have supplied members with a document that sets out the current control of housing and work statuses of entitled, licensed, registered, entitled for work and registered, and how they are currently achieved. I hope this will be helpful as we go through the debate and highlights that the majority of the draft regulations maintain the position of the current regulations. So, sir, you may ask, if nothing is changing, why am I bringing these regulations forward today? These draft regulations support the States Assembly previous approval of P.16 2022, the Draft Control of Housing and Work Amendment Jersey Law 202 in March 2022, and are part of a broad project to provide more responsive migration controls as a key control mechanism within the Common Population Policy. The current Control of Housing and Work, Residential and Employment Status Jersey Regulations 2013 will fall away with the introduction of the Amendment Law, and these draft regulations are required to allow the changes that the Amendment Law made to the Control of Housing and Work Jersey Law 2012 to come into force. The draft regulations are designed to provide a clear framework of how a person achieves a status under the Amendment Law, how a status can be lost or revoked, and the access each status gives to occupy accommodation, enter into property transactions, and to access work in Jersey. If adopted, these draft regulations would replace the current Control of Housing and Work, Residential and Employment Status Jersey Regulations 2013, sorry, that's a mouthful, and will be followed by orders to replace the current Control of Housing and Work Exemptions Jersey Order 2013 and the Control of Housing and Work Fees Jersey Order 2013. These will be completed and an appointed date act will be brought back to the Assembly before the end of this year. It is intended that the appointed date act, with the approval of members, will set a future date for Control of Housing and Work legislation to come into force. This will allow time to set up operational systems and to communicate changes appropriately. Sir, as Vice Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, I take my obligations to the Assembly extremely seriously, as I am sure we all do, and I wish to highlight the previous approval of a related proposition. In March 2021, the Assembly debated P.16 of 2020, that was the migration control policy, and approved some areas of the proposition that are not being progressed within these regulations. Whilst recognising the Assembly's authority at the time, I wish to outline why I do not cover all of the areas approved within P.137 of 2020 here. So, since March 2021, there has been significant external factors that I do not believe that the policy decisions taken by the Assembly in 2021 will still meet the needs of the local population. That decision was made ahead of the publication of the March 2021 census figures and against the backdrop of a much higher predicted population. The population estimates at the time suggested that a total population of 107,800 in 2019, while the actual 2021 census showed a total population of 103,267. The P.137 2020 debate was also held ahead of a full understanding of the impacts of Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. We are now able to access much richer and more timely data from Statistics Jersey, and this shows us that at the end of 2023, Jersey's overall population has remained relatively stable in the last 5 years since 2018. This is a marked difference from the high levels of population growth that we've seen in the 5 years prior to 2018. These statistics also show that Jersey has required inward migration to maintain its working age population, which has also remained stable over the last 5 years. In taking these impacts into account, these draft regulations maintain the same structure as the existing Control of Housing and Work statuses. They do not remove automatic graduation or provide time-limited statuses. Nor do the draft regulations take forward any requirement for an individual to make a declaration of any unspent criminal convictions when applying for a Control of Housing and Work law status. It is considered that the Jersey's position within the Common Travel Area would make any such requirement futile for British citizens. I have considered a vote to rescind the P.137 2020 approval, but feel that by bringing these new regulations to the Assembly, we have a mechanism to democratically make any change to that previous decision appropriately. I would also set up front my intention to debate Regulation 5 separately from the other regulations. Regulation 5 relates to a provision for entitled status for high net worth individuals. I have taken this decision as a result of conversations had with members from across the chamber. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the scrutiny panel for the time they have given to review the draft regulations and the support that they have communicated. I'd also like to recognise that the work stream on these regulations has spanned 2 Council of Ministers, and would also like to thank the work carried out on these draft regulations by previous ministers, who I hope will see much of their work and direction taken forward in this proposition. So, sir, in summary, these draft regulations aim to maintain the existing migration controls within the control of housing and work legislation, and are drafted so that they are easy to understand by using simpler language and structure, that they modernise considerations of relationships and family units, that they provide for increased transparency in making future changes, and they allow for digital solutions in supplying and demonstrating a status under the amendment law. They are required in order to bring the agreed amendment law into force, and I encourage members to support these regulations. I propose the regulations in the first reading. Thank you, sir.
Well, are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
So before the debate, I would like to raise that I likely to be benefited from the amendment, and I need your ruling.
So,
Very well. Very much.
so I think I would also benefit by a year.
So I think I might as well.
Anyone else?
Well, I've got to calculate it first, isn't it?
Anyone else going to benefit? Deputy Moore has indicated sympathy. Very well. Well, I think that's shared by a significant number of people. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. And I rise to speak as chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. For the benefit of the Assembly, the panel has undertaken a review of the draft regulations. We have presented comprehensive comments, and we've concluded our support for the draft regulations. As the Minister has said, we're content that these draft regulations reflect the changes introduced by the amendment law, approved in principle by the States Assembly in March 2022. And we have further detailed the relationship between the amendment law and these draft regulations in our comprehensive comments. We're satisfied that these regulations will not bring forward any policy changes in practice to the housing and work rules and statuses. They only increase flexibility for making future changes, simplify the terminology used, modernise considerations of relationships and family units, and enable the use of digital solutions, all of which we welcome. Importantly, they maintain the structure of the primary law, yet provide flexibility for future modifications through regulations and orders without having to alter the primary law itself. In terms of some more observations, to inform its review, the panel met privately with government officers and questioned the Chief Minister on the proposals during a quarterly hearing. The key observations from the panel are that there needs to be very clear public communication about the effects of the draft regulations to avoid confusion about the changes that would be brought into practice. Indeed, the panel raised this during the briefing, prior to lodging the proposition, and to the Chief Minister during the hearing, and there still seems to have been some confusion. The panel is pleased to note that future policy shifts will stem from improved data rather than prior assumptions. And this is really important because the 2009 migration projections, where data didn't account for impacts from Brexit or the COVID-19 pandemic. An important area of focus for the panel was that of the appeal procedure. The amendment law introduces a new housing and work control panel to handle appeals before referral to the Royal Court. This is a political panel to replace the current HAWAG Housing and Work Advisory Group. The panel raised concerns about the Chief Minister appointing members to this political panel who would review appeals related to their own decisions. One member aptly described this as marking one's own homework. The panel have also taken the opportunity to highlight the recommendation of the Jersey Law Commission to establish a single Jersey Administrative Appeals Tribunal for a unified appeals process and the benefits thereof, and would recommend that if that body is taken forward, that this appeal panel should be moved to this tribunal. The government has not provided clear proposals beyond the current proposed amendment. the Chief Minister acknowledges to the panel that future changes may be needed within 5 to 10 years. Nevertheless, the panel has emphasised its intention to scrutinise any forthcoming regulations that propose policy changes during this government term. The panel also noted that approval of the draft regulations today will not bring into immediate effect the amendment law and regulations. Should the draft regulations be adopted, new orders for fees and exemptions, updated public guidance and an appointed day act will be required and need to be brought to the States Assembly for approval to enforce the amended primary law and new regulations. And we're told this is expected by the end of 2025. The panel has emphasised its intention to review the orders and guidance ahead of them being brought forward for approval by the States Assembly. So to close, the panel supports the draft regulations in establishing a flexible legislative framework that better manages migration policy without the need to alter the primary law. However, the panel emphasises the need for careful scrutiny of any subsequent policy changes brought by way of regulations during this term of government and future governments, and their potential impact on Jersey's population. The panel will continue to monitor and review this work stream to ensure that any proposals align with Jersey's evolving needs. As changes will also likely be proposed by future governments moving forward, the panel urges continued scrutiny of any changes affecting the work stream. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy Barber-Ward.
Thank you, sir. Can I thank the Assistant Minister for bringing this, and if she could explain, and thank you very much for setting that out. It's been very helpful.
Through the chair, please.
Through the chair, sorry, sir. For bringing this, because it has actually stimulated a question. Could the Minister explain under the second section, or under licence section, and look to your right-hand side of that, where it says licensed for lease only, now shown. Does that, sir, actually contradict what it says in the left-hand side? I just would like, in the left-hand side, it talks about your essential employee, that is your teachers, nurses, doctors, professionals allied to health, who can lease, buy and sell. But on this right-hand side, it says lease only. So may I ask the Minister just for some explanation of why there is a difference, because I'm a little bit confused. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Alves to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I like to start by thanking the Chair of Corporate Services for her comments. And just to pick up on the comments around the appeal process. So the draft regulations, the Chair was correct, but they do not cover an appeal process. These have formed part of a previous debate and approval of the Control of Housing and Work Amendment Law. Within that primary legislation, there is an appeal route to the Royal Court in the same way as previously, and the formation of the new panel is the internal review mechanism, which allows a person to request a review of a decision without going to a full appeal if they desire to use that route. This does not negate the ability of a person to use the appeal route at any time. The decisions which can be taken to appeal are outlined in Article 41 of the previously agreed amendment law. The Chair was correct, we don't currently have an external tribunal set up. We use the Royal Court at the moment, but if a broad tribunal service is established in the future, I'd be happy to revisit the appeals route within the Control of Housing and Work law. To address the comments raised by Deputy Barbara Ward, thank you for that, and I'm glad that this has helped simplify things for members. So currently, it's not a contradiction as such, because we do already have licensed for lease only in our currently in the policy. So it is a policy part of the main policy. Generally speaking, this is normally awarded to people who may be on a temporary type work contract, so it may not be that they necessarily have a permanent one, but while they're here, they obviously need to access housing. So licensed lease only is already used as a condition when we give licenses. It just wasn't down as a separate regulation within the current setup. So I hope that's clarified that. So I maintain the principles. Thank you.
Those in favour of adopting the principles kindly show. And it's called for. I invite any members not in the chamber to return. And the vote is on the principles. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted, 42 votes pour, no votes contre, 1 abstention.
Can we have the abstention, please?
The abstention, yes.
Deputy Gorst abstained.
Does the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel wish to call the matter in? I assume not, in the light of your comments, Deputy. Very much indeed. We come to second reading. How do you wish to propose the regulations, Deputy Alves, in second reading?
So there's an amendment to Regulation 2, so I'd like to take that as amended. And then I'd like to, as I stated earlier, that I'd like to take a separate vote on Regulation 5. So I'd like to propose Regulations 1 to 4 to start with, and then 5, and then 6 to 27.
Yes. Well, do members agree that we can take the matter as amended? Very well. In which case, you propose, firstly, regulation... Yes, Deputy Miles?
Excuse me, sir, I'm not sure whether I've got confused. Are we talking about the amendment to the draft regulations at this point?
Yes. Well, what Deputy Alves has said is that she, given it's an amendment of the Chief Minister, she has agreed to take the entire regulations as amended by that amendment. There's only one amendment to it, which is a short amendment to Regulation 2D, which changes the period of years from one thing to another. I can't immediately recall it off the top of my head. But there will also be a separate vote on Regulation 5.
The Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel were not able to scrutinise the amendment that the Chief Minister has brought, and I therefore would like that to be debated separately.
Well, then that's perfectly acceptable, and you're entitled to have it debated quite distinctly. Very well. Well, then it's an amendment to Section 2. You'll probably simply wish to propose Amendment 1 separately now, Deputy, and we can deal with that, and then we will come on to the Amendment 2. One moment. I think you propose all of the regular. I've been slightly corrected, and I think the greffier is right. You propose all of the amendments. Then we take a separate, whether or not we amend Regulation 2, and there'll be a separate vote when we come to vote on Regulation 5. So, if you'd like to propose the amendments.
Okay, so thank you, sir. So an amendment has been put forward to Regulation 2.1d, which intends to reduce the period of continuous ordinary residence required to achieve permanent entitled status. In the current regulations, this stands at 30 years. And I propose within this amendment and the draft regulations that this period is amended to a period of 25 continuous and ordinary residents. This amendment comes following discussions with Deputy Alex Curtis, and as a reduction had already been discussed at the Hayway Plus Ministerial Group, and the Chief Minister and I were willing to bring forward this amendment. And I'd like to take that opportunity to thank Deputy Alex Curtis for these discussions. Permanent entitled status cannot be lost, whereas currently a person who has achieved entitled status after 10 years and been continuously resident in Jersey for 25 years would lose their entitled status should they be absent from Jersey for a period of 5 years and would therefore revert to registered or standard status. The aim is to recognise the significant period of time spent contributing to the Jersey community by a person not born in Jersey, but who has been continuously and ordinarily resident in Jersey for a period of 25 years. Following Brexit and COVID, it's important to ensure that Jersey can continue to attract these skills and labour for our economy and society, and that workers and their families are treated and rewarded fairly. I believe this strikes the right balance of maintaining sufficient migration controls whilst rewarding individuals that have contributed substantial periods of their life to our community and economy with the freedom to return to Jersey as they wish to do so. It is important to note, however, that this is only applied to those who hold a British passport or those who have relevant migration permissions to live in Jersey. The reduction from 30 to 25 years of continuous and ordinary residence will have little impact upon the housing demand, as entitled status can be achieved after a period of 10 years continuous residency. Members of the community who have continuously present in Jersey for a period of 25 years will have held entitled status for a period of 15 years. Entitled status allows a person to live and purchase qualified property, and permanent entitled status gives no further access to housing or work. It simply ensures that entitled status is not lost. Thank you, sir.
So you are proposing the amendment now? You've just proposed Amendment 2?
Yes.
Right. Well, we'll take it that way then. Amendment 2 is Amendment to Regulation 2, the only amendment, but to Regulation 2, I might go out and come back in a moment. Is that seconded?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. And I'm just going to speak briefly on the amendment because following the briefing for members the other day, I just wanted to make it clear that this amendment has not been reviewed by the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and the panel has not formally been briefed or conducted any scrutiny on the amendment due to the short time scale. We're aware that the proposed amendment was as a result of discussions between Deputy Alex Curtis in his personal capacity and Deputy Karina Alves, Assistant Chief Minister, who has designated responsibility for this work stream. So whilst the panel did discuss the amendment at our last meeting, panel members will be drawing their own conclusions and will vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to thank likewise both the Assistant Chief Minister and the Chief Minister for engaging on this. I think it's fair to say islanders who have served pretty much normally for their entire working life, 30 years, and now hopefully 25 years, deserve to know that Jersey is a home for them and a place that they can be able to be and take time away. And to put that into context, it'll be no surprise right now, an islander who moves here and starts work at the age of 20 will have to be continuously resident until they are 50 before they know that they can take extended leaves away from the island. That is an incredibly long period of time, and the world is a big place, and those who have committed such time may have family who are reaching older age, or they may have aspirations to travel whilst they still can, and knowing that actually after 25 years this is a position we can be in where islanders can achieve permanent entitled status, I think is the correct balance. I think it's right to move it here at this speed, and I thank the Assistant Chief Minister for highlighting it was a conversation. There's no point in my view here, individual members lobbing amendments over the fence, and on such a matter like this, I felt it better to speak with ministers involved and see if they would like to lodge it, knowing there may well have been conversations. Lastly, what I would say is, under existing regulations and under the new regulations, there are still abilities for those who are yet to be permanent entitled to take leave from the island. Those include reasons for secondment, for work, or for a period of travel. That guidance is quite hard for many islanders to digest. So whilst we're in a position where hopefully this will entice those who've served a great deal of time in this island to know this can be their home for life. That actually the Assistant Chief Minister and Chief Minister do not stop in their work in making our policies understandable, especially with regards to those who say apply to the department to take a year's sabbatical or a year's travel, that they are confident in the knowledge that when they return and resume work here, that their period of continuous residence for permanent entitled status is not broken. So I support this, and I hope other members do.
Sir, point of clarification.
Yes. Do you give way for a point of clarification?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. And it's a point of clarification which actually started in Deputy Miles' speech, but it's a point of clarification of Deputy Curtis's speech, which was Deputy Miles said, referred to Deputy Curtis requesting this amendment in his personal capacity. So it just sadly put doubt in my mind and it made me think, would the Deputy please clarify whether he is bringing this because he knows of particular people or there's particular circumstances, or is he bringing this as a general good for the island? Because I was just concerned by that there are particular people that the Deputy has in mind may benefit.
Deputy Curtis is not bringing this amendment. This is an amendment brought by
Did he request this amendment with individuals in mind, or was it a general good for the island?
I can clarify that if it helps, sir, without making it a second speech. I know individuals, those who didn't approach me, those who did approach me. I think we all do, and actually given the number of people here who have actually declared an interest, there are many states members in this room who will benefit from this. So it is something I think will benefit the wider island. It was raised to me by multiple people, but nobody has directly asked me to lodge this. It is from my experiences in talking to islanders, both those who I am friendly with and those who actually I hold as broad acquaintances, and those who you see once every 5 years, but enough people that I realised it's an important thing. So I hope that clarifies the matter, sir.
Very well. Deputy Joseph.
So I was grateful for the Assistant Chief Minister in recognising those of us in this Assembly that have got some history of the work and housing law. And in this particular amendment, it is having been responsible for the law drafting, but not the actual law, I think that there is clearly I can't remember why this was put in with such a long period of thing. The whole purpose of work and housing was to have a non-discriminatory approach. If you're good enough to live in Jersey, you are good enough to work and you're good enough to buy. And we used to be in this Assembly, sir, way back, there were some members like me, you could never get housing qualifications, no matter how long you ever stayed here. That was the situation in 1998. I almost regret that it's 25 years, but if you're good enough to be in Jersey for that amount of time, in a world that is so short-term in its situation, where people have lots of opportunities, where we want to encourage people to be global citizens, get experience outside, this has to be absolutely the right thing to do. And I just would have encouraged Deputy Curtis and the Assistant Chief Minister to be even more bolder, because it's the right thing to do. And I warmly congratulate Deputy Curtis and the Assistant Chief Minister for doing this.
Deputy Gorst.
So I may have had a momentary lapse in concentration, but I'm not sure that we actually moved the regulations, proposed the regulations. We went simply to the amendment to the regulation.
We have gone simply to the amendment. I have, I'm afraid, bitten the bullet when we were well into dealing with the amendment and realised that was the position. And I propose, therefore, to take the vote on the amendment and then, on the assumption it is passed or not, propose the regulations as amended or otherwise in second reading. But you're quite right, Deputy, we have not yet dealt with the regulations at all. We're just working out whether we're going to deal with them as amendments or not. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Alves to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to thank members for talking, for speaking on that, and for raising some of the issues and some of their thoughts as well. To answer Deputy Curtis, guidance is currently being worked on to make it easier to understand, and that's why it's important to have the time to do that guidance ahead of the Appointed Date Act. I will also say, to build on the point that Deputy Morell brought up, I deal with a number of appeals on a weekly basis, and I have had appeals as well for people who are wanting to who have appealed to have permanent entitled status, which actually cannot be granted in the current way that the law and the regulations are structured. And this has sometimes been because, for example, they have elderly parents who live in the UK and they want to go back and care for them. They have property here, and they have their children here, their grandchildren here. They're worried that their parents in the UK may live longer than the 5 years that they're allowed to be out of the island. And currently there isn't a mechanism to enable me, even with a ministerial decision, to grant that permanent entitled status. I think that was it. And I'd just like to thank Deputy Ozef as well. Oh, actually, on Deputy Ozef's point, I believe the original consultation that was done on this a number of years ago actually did consult on 25 years originally, and the members at the time decided to put 30 years instead. So I hope that members will be supportive of this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Those in favour of adopting the amendment kindly show. That is called for. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on whether or not Regulation 2 can be amended in the terms of the amendment, and then it will form part of the regulations when they're put to the vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted, 41 votes pour, no votes contre, 3 abstentions. Very well, we move now formally to second reading with the amendment as amended, or rather, beg your pardon, with the regulation as amended. So how do you propose the matter in second reading?
So I'd like to start by proposing regulations 1 to 4, please.
Are regulations 1 to 4 seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on regulations 1 to 4 inclusive? If no member wishes to speak, then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting regulations 1 to 4 inclusive, kindly show. That is called for. Invite any members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on regulations 1 to 4. If members have the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. "41 votes pour, 2 votes abstaining and 0 votes contre." Very well. You wish to deal with Regulation 5 separately?
Yes, please, sir, and I'd just like to briefly speak on that
Yes.
as well. Thank you. So Regulation 5 provides a route to entitled status for high net worth individuals. It's also sometimes referred to as 21Es or 11Ks. As the routes to each status are more clearly defined in the draft regulation, this provides a structure that allows me to be able to take this regulation as a separate vote. Should the Assembly vote contre on Regulation 5, all persons currently using the high-value resident route to entitled status would continue to be able to do so, honouring existing statuses. It would, however, close the route to future applications once the draft regulations came into force. There is no further impact upon the remaining draft regulations should Regulation 5 be removed. I maintain the regulation. Thank you.
Close Regulation 5. Is Regulation 5 seconded? Does any member wish to speak on Regulation 5? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I'll say 2 things on Regulation 5, which in essence is, if the Assistant Chief Minister says correctly in the regulations, are in essence a replacement for the 21E provision within the former law and the 11K in the law before that. The first comment I would make is, whilst the 2022 changes to primary legislation introduced what is now defined as the Housing and Work Control Panel, which the chair of the CSSP panel mentioned. This obviously has not been formed yet because the law isn't active and live. And so I would have a question and hope that the Chief Minister could respond to this, which is how does the Chief Minister intend to staff or fill the posts within such a panel? The Housing and Work Advisory Group is currently made up of ex officio members, including the Minister for Housing and I believe the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, although I would have to double check my mind on that one. But in essence, the new Housing and Work Control Panel would have no ex officio members, and the Chief Minister would be able to staff this however he so chooses. As such, it's a concern, I'm sure, to some members that the decision-making on what are very important matters is taken from roles that ultimately had an assembly vote. So right now we voted for our Minister for Housing, and he sits on said panel and is accountable for that as a role within his function. So I would really be interested to hear how the Chief Minister, does he see a value in using certain roles in a similar fashion, or is he looking to staff it with those who will agree with the policy position he likes? And I say that not poorly, that's a choice that the law now provides. He could fill the roles to meet a certain objection. Does he believe that this is fit for purpose and allows the panel to be held suitably accountable under its membership? That's the first part. And then I think, secondly, members have a choice on whether they want this scheme to exist. And I'm reassured that the mover has said that ultimately this would not affect those here and cause legal challenges. I'll leave it there, but it's really, I'd like clarification on the panel if it is to form under this regulation.
Does anyone any other member wish to speak on Regulation 5? No other member wishes to speak? Chief Minister.
Well, sir, just to answer, probably from my perspective as current Chief Minister, I plan to make no changes to the current makeup of the panel for the rest of this term, but this is really forward-looking, and as in the spirit of the rest of the changes, to provide more flexibility around future challenges that face us. So no change from me during this full government, sir. Thank you.
Very much. Deputy Taddy.
Thank you, sir. Because this touches on the question of 21E status, I thought it might be helpful for us to consider how we might vote on this by way of a small illustration. So at the end of last week, we had what was a private briefing with the chief economist. But I did use the opportunity to, and the briefing, I think I can say, I'm not going to disclose anything that he said to us. The briefing was partly to do with the living wage and the fact that a great deal of work is being done on looking at the potential economic consequences of moving to a living wage, including, I suppose, what you might traditionally call a cost-benefit analysis. And I think that work does need to be done, and it means that government is going into what's quite a new area of work with its eyes wide open, something that they support both on principle, I think, and which has been pushed for quite a while, but which they want to make sure they know all the consequences for, both intended or unintended. When it came to the Jersey's policy on high net worth individuals, as some would call them, and I don't think there's any ideal phrasing that we might use that implies maybe about worth, and we've covered that in the past. No cost-benefit analysis has ever been done of the current scheme, or indeed of the scheme in its inception. And if that's not the case, I'm happy to be corrected. But I've never seen any cost-benefit analysis. And so, on the one hand, it seems that you can have criticism for perhaps proposing things ideologically. So those who say, you know, we favour the living wage, it's absolutely right. I think that government is doing the detailed work, but it's okay to be ideological in certain other areas and just apply certain traditional economics as an act of faith, saying that this is necessarily good for the community. The truth is we don't know about the impacts that the 21E scheme, and therefore voting for or against Regulation 5 might have. And I would simply put it to the government that if they are so sure, or any future government, that the scheme is of value and that it doesn't have unintended consequences for the community that we live in, and that it is a net benefit, that they should be willing to show the workings and not simply apply that as an act of faith or an act of conventional ideological economics, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on Regulation 5? If another member wishes to speak, Deputy Oser.
So I'm very sorry, but I am not understanding, and I'm not really understanding what it is, the consequences of, you were going to wrap up the debate, I assume there's nobody going to be speaking against, but I'm not really sure, if I'm honest, and I don't know whether I'm the only one, what the consequences of a vote against this is. Because there's something that's not been said, and we're a parliament and we should be discussing things openly, sir. May I just seek clarification? The Assistant Chief Minister can't speak because he hasn't spoken, but maybe he can reply. But the Attorney General could also. Can I just put, for the avoidance of doubt, sir, my understanding is that all 21Es that have been given permission would continue to be able to live in Jersey, but if this vote is rejected, then it is goodbye 21E policy, no more high-value net worth individuals. Have I understood that right? So, and I hope you don't mind me asking because it wasn't clear.
Well, it's entitled as a question. It can either be addressed by Deputy Alves in response. The Chief Minister can't speak. He has already spoken. Or you can address it as a question, I suppose, as a matter of law to the law officers. How do you wish to deal with that?
I wonder if the Solicitor General will be kind enough just to clarify the fact that if this is if I've misunderstood it, I apologise, but if the vote is against this article, then we do not have a legal mechanism to undertake 21Es in the future, notwithstanding the fact that there is an income tax law which bridges it, because we're Assembly, we should understand what we're doing. Sorry.
Well, I think on the face of it, it would mean that there wouldn't be an equivalent of I think it's the 21E status. I'd aim to give a definitive answer. I might need to spend some careful time looking back through the amendment law that was passed in 2021, I think now, to see whether, notwithstanding the loss of Regulation 5, somehow the original 21E status would survive. It may be others, not least the Minister, will have been far better briefed than I to respond to the Deputy's question.
Very much. Well,
on the basis that this is a vote to, as I best understand it, I'm grateful for the Solicitor General. If my understanding is, but it is complicated because there's a number of different interrelated laws and an underlying law which is very controversial. So for the avoidance of doubt, if this is a vote in favour of scrapping versus keeping 21Es, then I would urge members kindly to vote in favour of the amendment, because to do so would to disrupt Jersey's future economic growth and all the benefits, albeit that the Assistant Chief Minister this morning has explained that there is more to do and more can be done to benefit Jersey, because we don't want a two-tier society, because that's the issue that's underlying this, I think, is that we have effectively a growing number of 21Es or previously 11Ks, and their demonstrable wealth and their things is in stark contrast to many islanders who are facing cost of living pressures everywhere. And so there is this uncomfortable tension, sir. And so, but it's important we debate things that we know what we're doing. I would be favour in supporting the Assistant Chief Minister's amendment, because done properly, with the right balance, with the right decision-making, 21Es can be very valuable to our economy. They can bring the jobs and the growth of the future. They can be very important to support all sorts of future economic activities, not-for-profit organisations and all the rest of it. So it would be, I don't want to do anything by accident, but if this is a vote, if effectively this is a sort of a debate on 21Es or not, then it's yes 2-1Es, but please, Council of Ministers, Assistant Chief Minister, if I may ask through the Chair, sir, for them to be very mindful of what the original intention of the 2-1E status was, that people should be contributing and there should be real value for Jersey's economy, not just, and I know that the ministers are shaking their heads, sir, they need to do more to explain the benefits and not just the disbenefits, which are banded around people wanting changing planning laws, etc. like that. It's not quite that. There is real benefit to Jersey in having 2-1Es, and we should welcome them, and we should be a very welcoming island. And this is an opportunity for the Assembly to show its support, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to add my request for a bit of clarity, perhaps when Deputy Alvis does her summing up, just in terms of quite where this has come from, because I think we're now, having originally been presented with a law that was just simplifying things, that this particular regulation has been presented separately so that we are actually making a decision right now, a policy decision, which again has not been reviewed by the corporate scrutiny panel as a policy move as such. So I think I would just like Deputy, and I'm aware that Deputy Alvis is acting as the Chief Minister's rapporteur, so I just would like it to be clear if he actually has requested this move or has supported this move to have this separately debated, because for me, I'm afraid I just wasn't aware that this was going to be a policy matter that's separately debated.
So the other member wish to speak on regulation. Deputy Menace. Isaac.
Thank you, sir. I'd intended to keep my head down in this debate, but I think some comments were made by the External Relations Minister in question time earlier today, and felt that it was probably right for me to clarify my position on this. Just on briefly before getting into that, though, sir, the comments just made by Deputy Scott, I think it's worth saying that the intention of these regulations as a whole, it was not to provoke a big policy debate on this. The purpose of it was to clean up the law, change the terminology and make it more modern and fit for purpose. It just so happens that if you're doing that and addressing lots of articles in a law, if the Assembly did, as it's entitled to do, voted against one of those articles, that would have the effect of doing a policy change. You know, we could, for example, choose not to vote for Article 6 of this, in which case there wouldn't be a route any more for people getting entitled status on the grounds of hardship. That's not why the debate was done. It's just a consequence of that because of how the law is written. So earlier today, in question time, the External Relations Minister referred to a member of the Housing Work Advisory Group having an issue with the 2-1E regime on principle. And so that is true, but it's not the full picture. As well as having an issue with it on principle, I have an issue with it on practical grounds as well. So my issue on principle with it stems from what Deputy Joseph said before, which I thought was the opposite of the reality. He talked about not creating a two-tier society, when in fact the 2-1E regime creates a two-tier society by offering people a route for essentially buying privileges that other people have to work for. And that goes against what I believe in. I don't believe we should be a society that provides for that, because I believe in equality, and I believe everybody ought to be treated under the same principles. But, sir, do you know, I could probably find grounds to overlook that if I thought that there was a good body of evidence that said exceptions to that could produce benefits from which we could all enjoy, which is why, sir, in my career in government, in which I've had 2 stints as a member of the Housing and Work Advisory Group, I've repeatedly asked for those who present me with 2-1E applications, of which I have read through more than I could possibly count, to demonstrate to me what actually is the economic benefit. Is there a cost-benefit analysis? Do the pros outweigh the cons? And despite, sir, being in a position of decision-making on it, whenever I have asked for that, I have never been given it. And so, sir, it's on practical grounds as well that I don't feel that I can support applications when I'm not given the level of evidence that I would require in order to put aside what might be a
naive point of principle in order to support something that practically I felt would benefit islanders. I've never been given that evidence, and therefore I think it's wrong, sir, on behalf of the people who voted me into this assembly to make decisions on their behalf, to make decisions without access to that, when I, on the face of it, don't believe that it produces the kinds of benefits that people say without referring to the evidence. In the time that we've had this regime, sir, our island has become a more unequal place with poverty rates going up, and I simply don't see a connection. And the idea that if we bring in more people, maybe that will fix it, sir, I believe Albert Einstein had something to say about that kind of tactic, and I don't think it's right. And that's why, sir, I wouldn't be prepared to vote for Amendment 5 in these regulations. I think it's something that if we want to have a feature as an offer that we provide, we do a proper job and do a proper economic benefit analysis of it before coming back to it. And I, in good conscience, simply can't continue to support it on behalf of my constituents.
So, may I ask for a point of clarification?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm grateful for the Housing Minister. I'm just, could he say, could he please clarify that he has had no statement of the benefit to the island? I don't know what he means, but could he confirm what he means by cost-benefit analysis? Is he saying that he's got no evidence that there are 21Es benefit Jersey overall? Is that what he's actually saying, so as I understand?
The key word there is overall, sir. I have wanted to see greater evidence and some kind of proper study, but all I get is a sentence in response saying, oh yeah, of course it benefits us. And so I've no doubt that there are some people who probably, on an individual basis, contribute way more than any negative that might theoretically arrive from them. But sir, as a programme, I have not seen a collective body of evidence that's been reviewed in any kind of analytical manner that can provide me with a definitive conclusion. It seems to me, sir, that people believe in a received wisdom of this policy that they take for granted, and I don't think that that's an appropriate standard to apply to that kind of thing.
Any other member wishes to speak? Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I'm loath slightly to enter the fray because I think, like other members, I was slightly surprised that we're taking this particular part separately, but we are any mover of any proposition, and any member has the right to call for a particular part of legislation to be debated and voted on separately. But here we are, and I'd just like to refer us back to the careful wording of my colleague, I think we're Assistant Chief Ministers, and she was very careful in the way she worded her moving of this particular article to say that we are transferring one piece of legislation. Well, we're not transferring it. Really, one piece of legislation is repealed and replaced by this piece of legislation. And therefore, in repealing the other piece of legislation, if we wish to, in all of this tidying up work, maintain what we think of as either a 1.1k or a 2.1e regime, we must support this Article 5. If we vote against Article 5, as we've heard some will be doing, we will no longer have a high net worth regime. And it's okay for some members to say, but those people who are already here under this regime will remain. They will, some of them, remain, but others will believe that today was the day when Jersey became insular, it became unwelcoming to innovation, to investment, to business growth, and to being a warm, welcoming community. And I, for one, will be supporting my colleague, Assistant Chief Minister, in voting for Article 5 of this piece of legislation. Reports have been done. Sometimes, when reports are undertaken, if we don't like the results of the report, we sometimes forget that the report was undertaken in the first place. And I'm not sure how many years ago it was, but it was done. There was a lot of also consultation done in bringing forward the new regime where high net worths pay more in tax than they've ever paid before. The other thing I'd just say, sir, is that we can, and I enjoy disagreeing politically with my ministerial colleagues, because it should be about policy that we are disagreeing. And that is, we do know that from income distribution surveys, income inequality has grown. But when we look at why it has grown because of the cost of housing. It's been the case for the last probably at least a decade, if not longer. And this government is committed, and which is why it's disappointing for me to hear what the Housing Minister says about 21Es, because he is committed to ensuring that we deal with that high cost of housing. And government has brought forward, carrying on the work of the previous government, proposals to deal with the high cost of housing, because it is the high cost of housing that is the driver of income inequality in Jersey. Now, that's all really technical when we start talking about income inequality, but what it means is that how affordability, cost of living is exacerbated because of the cost of housing. So I cannot say to members more strongly than I am saying now, please support the Assistant Chief Minister in voting for Article 5 and send that strong message to those who are currently here, part of our community, and those who are considering becoming part of our community, that we welcome you, we recognise the value that you can bring to our community, and we want to work in partnership to deliver businesses, jobs, innovation, and all of those important things that mean that Jersey's got a positive and bright future. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on Regulation 5? No other member? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'm just pleased to follow the Minister for External Relations. When he says we want to be a welcoming island, I absolutely agree with him. I look forward to his support for P20, the extension of eligibility for election criteria, because that is a very welcoming proposition that brings us and welcomes people who have been on this island for such a long time to be part of this assembly. How much more welcoming can we be? I'm also pleased to hear that he understands that high rents are such a problem on the island, and therefore he will support the draft regulations of housing that will be coming, which will look at rent stabilisation. So that's a reassuring thing there, sir. However, I cannot agree with him on the other parts. It is part of my manifesto. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on Regulation 5? No other member wishes to speak? I close the debate and call upon Deputy Alves to respond.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to just start off by thanking Deputy Gorst, who has highlighted that my reason for taking this separately was actually because any member can request for this, so I decided to preempt that and have this discussion. My personal view is obviously not, as you have heard from my party members, the same as my colleague, Deputy Gorst. However, given that I am probably in feeling a bit conflicted in this position, I will probably abstain on this occasion. Sir, I wanted to just clarify something, or a correction regarding the panel that Deputy Alex Curtis brought up. The panel was actually agreed in the amendment law, not in these regulations. So, sir, I propose Regulation 5. Thank you.
Well, is the appel called for?
Yes, please, sir.
Let us call for and invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on Regulation 5 in second reading. I ask the referee to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Regulation 5 has been adopted, 31 votes pour, 10 votes contre, 4 abstentions.
10, please, sir.
And the 4, please, sir.
Those members voting contre, Deputies Southern, Tadier, Rob Ward, Mezek, Coles, Porre, Beltham, Alex Curtis, Andrews and Catherine Curtis. And those members abstaining, Deputies Alves, Kovac, Jeune and Duplay.
Can I raise a point of order, sir?
Yes.
I previously asked you, sir, about, and I know this is not a point of order that will have an immediate answer, but I previously asked you about the issues that members such as myself don't understand about the Troy rule and how this is. We've just had a situation, in my view, so it seems to be rather unparliamentary that a mover of a proposition then basically abstains because of some counterweighting force. And I just ask whether or not that's something that you believe as presiding officer is normal or acceptable in the context of a party being part of government.
Well, the norm is obviously that whoever proposes is likely to wish to support and vote for a particular thing. However, I don't think there is anything wrong as a matter of principle with someone moving a proposition because they believe it their duty to do so, but nonetheless seeking to abstain. But I think they have to make their position clear to the Assembly.
So
yes,
if it is a point of order, sir, could you also rule that it's not the first time a mover of a proposition has abstained on?
No, that's a point of opinion.
I think it happened last.
It's not a point
it's not
of
opinion,
order.
sir. I think it happened last session.
Deputy Alves, do you move regulations 6 to the end plus the schedules?
Yes, please, sir.
Are those regulations seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on those regulations in second reading? If no member wishes to speak, then those in favour of adopting regulations 6...
Call for the appel.
Appel is called for. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on regulations 6 to the end plus the schedules. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations 6 to 27 and schedules have been adopted in second reading, 41 votes pour, no votes contre, 1 abstention. You propose in third reading?
Yes, please, sir.
Is it seconded for third reading?
Yes, please, sir.
I'm going to try not to be like a jack-in-the-box, but these are issues of parliamentary importance, and we're dealing with a law that is probably one of the most significant laws that has been of interest and the voting public, when this law was originally brought into force, amalgamated the 1949 housing law and the regulations of undertakings. And in the third reading, sir, a matter that I brought to the Assistant Chief Minister and to the government as a whole, is that the whole purpose of the work and housing law was to make it appropriate and less red tape and less bureaucratic to be able to employ people in Jersey. The Assistant Chief Minister earlier said, quite rightly, that the world has changed since the States Assembly in 2020 to 2020 or 22 passed a quite extraordinary proposition which the Assistant Chief Minister has referred to. In now having adopted in the third reading these matters, will the Assistant Chief Minister with the government kindly consider members such as myself who have a very strong view that in the world in which we are facing recruitment crises, we are effectively now having dare I say it, a disposable system of immigration where we have people in and out on a short-term basis. We had a debate earlier, sir, about whether or not we had the right to live after 25 years. We now have a workforce that actually is never going to get any rights because they're on work permits, etc. I'm not going to stray into the work permit debate because I should not.
Deputy, may I just interrupt you and say that any speech on third reading should be limited to whether the Assembly adopts the law or not in third reading.
And it should adopt it, sir, but with the caveat that now with the powers that this law has and the abilities by regulations to amend things, that the government is, I think, needing to take account of the concerns of business who are saying that they are mired in red tape. The government is right to do productivity improvements and to do red tape reviews. The Minister for Sustainable Economic Development is doing so, and would the Assistant Chief Minister kindly please concern herself with these issues, because the original intention was to streamline. She's done a good job in relation to these amendments, which made it less pejorative, improvements that are there, but there's a whole realm of things that needs to be done because the world is so different from when we brought the simple one-stop shop for working controls. And I take this opportunity of congratulating the Work and Housing Office, who do a fantastic job, unseen, for basically dealing with people's licences and registered applications. But unfortunately, we now have a completely separate system, which doesn't seem to be talking to one another. And we are a sovereign island, so we can make decisions. And I think the Assistant Chief Minister knows what I'm talking about. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tadier.
But in deciding whether or not the Assembly votes for this in the third reading, sir, I think there are some considerations that I'd like to make, partly with my scrutiny chair hat on. So the scrutiny panel, of course, being the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, sir. Whilst this is being moved as a proposition under the Chief Minister's Department, and very ably, might I say, by his Assistant Chief Minister, Deputy Alves, I think we may also wish to consider, because one of the criticisms that I think, partly continuing from where Deputy Oza, and it's not a criticism of what's being moved, but maybe of what might otherwise have been in the amendments, is that these amendments, I think it has to be said, are very tame. Essentially, I think they're moving in the right direction. I think the reduction from a 30 years to a 25 years is the right direction of travel. But when we listen to the ethos of some of the comments that were made earlier in the debate about Jersey wanting to be welcoming, not being an insular island, I mean, okay, it's difficult not to be insular when you're an island, I suppose, by definition. But we can decide what kind of ethos we want to put out there in terms of the message we're putting out there. The message is very much we're open for business when it comes to super wealthy moving to the island, and that's fine. We can all slightly disagree about that, and we can hopefully aim to find some facts about that too. But I think I'm reminded that this law, its very essence, is about the economy. And I was also reminded last week, speaking with the chief economist and our panel, was reminded of the fact that the economy isn't just about money. In fact, it's not really about money. The economy is about people. It's about people's lives and how we interact with each other. And it's partly about wealth, of course, but it's about surviving. It's about making a home for ourselves here. And it's about how we do that, sir. And I'm also mindful of the fact that I don't think we have a two-tier society, but there's a strong risk that we're moving towards a three-tier society where we have super rich who are in some ways the only ones who can actually afford any meaningful standard of living in Jersey. Increasingly, you could argue, you have the working population or the retired population, and then we have cheap labour, which is just imported, and I think which Deputy Ozef alluded to, which is those who have got very few rights because we don't allow them to accumulate their rights. And I think there is that disparity between the way we treat those at the top when we're welcoming people from the top who I think never lose their status once they've got it. They don't have to worry about this 25-year, is it 25 or 30? You get it from day one and you can jump the queue. Whereas there are many people who work very hard in this island, and many of us actually happen to be the descendants, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of economic migrants who came to the island perhaps in the 1890s or in the 1910s, sir, but who were able to settle here and make it their island, sir, something which I think we're depriving of future generations. So what I would like the Assistant Minister to consider in summing up, perhaps, or indeed for the Assembly to consider going forward, is the fact that this law was very much put in at a time when we were trying to keep people out of the island. We wanted to restrict housing because maybe there was a shortage of housing, but there was also maybe economic growth, but also the population growth was seen in a very different way. And I think we need to have that honest conversation, especially with the public, because it's not going to be a populist thing to do. Any politician or group of politicians that proposes perhaps liberalising who might be able to actually live and stay in Jersey, even though it's the right thing to do, may not that may not fully be understood by the population, sir. So for my part, I would like to understand whether or not these amendments that we made today could have gone further. What are the wider economic implications that exist from the current regulation of housing and work laws? For example, what are the implications of not allowing people to buy properties in Jersey, even though they're living here, working here for 10 years when they could be investing in the island? And finally, sir, there's this presumption, because I've heard it said that under some economic models, Jersey needs to have 150,000 people living on the island to sustain it economically. And there's this idea that you're only economically of value if you're still working, and that presumes that if you're a pensioner, that you're not really of value to the economy, which I'd like to actually say is not the case, because pensioners have paid in over the years. It's their money that they put into the pot, and it's their money that they're getting back, and they're spending that's in the economy. So I think we do need to have a wider discussion about what the longer aim is for these housing and work rules. Are they going to be moving down to a sensible regime where actually we're allowing people who already live in the island, who already work in the island, who already want to make it their home, to have a stake in that island? Because if we don't give them a stake in that island, we can't complain when there are low civic engagement levels, because they don't feel that Jersey is for them, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Alves to respond.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start by thanking Deputy Talia for his contributions, and I think this format that we now have in the regulations does give us more flexibility, and I will take on board his contributions. I think the other point I wanted to make was with regards to Deputy Ozef's contribution, which was around the current policy controls, and this also comes back to the licensed lease only point that Deputy Barbara Ward raised earlier on. At the moment, we do have people who are here on visa and permit work who are given licensed lease only, and it is precisely because of the kind of temporary element of their immigration status, for example, that we can give them a license to enable them to rent, but obviously not knowing whether they'll be able to stay past the 3-year mark, for example, if they've got a 3-year work permit. But the current regulations make things a lot clearer. It also means that we are able to tweak the policy on licenses. So I recently made a decision to include veterinary nurses, for example, in the licensing scheme, which they weren't included before because they didn't hit certain criteria, but because we have a shortage of them on the island, and even with local veterinary practices training up local people, we still needed some more. So there is a lot more flexibility in these regulations, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to propose some new ones as and when needed with more flexibility. So thank you, sir. I'd just like to close by thanking fellow ministers and scrutiny colleagues for their support in bringing forward these regulations. And just to say as well that I note scrutiny's request to be kept updated with regards to the orders and the guidance ahead of an appointed day act, and I will ensure that we keep that dialogue open. So, sir, I would like to recommend the regulations in third reading to the Assembly. Thank you, sir.
Call for the appeal.
Yes, please, sir.
I invite members to return to the chamber. The appeal is called for, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is the regulations in third reading. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, and I ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations have been adopted in third reading, 42 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Very well. The next item is increase stamp duty for properties that are not principal residence to 5%, P16, lodged by Deputy Andrews. The main responder is the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and I ask the Prefect to read the proposition.
The States were asked to decide whether they are of opinion that stamp duty, land transaction tax and enveloped property transaction tax for a property that is not the purchaser's principal residence should be increased to 5%, and to request that the Minister for Treasury and Resources bring forward for approval the necessary legislation to give effect to this decision no later than the 1st of January 2026.
Yes, Deputy.
Thank you, sir. As many members in this States Assembly are fundamentally aware, Jersey has a housing crisis. Deputy Mezek, in fact, has been leading on this issue, and he has been for some time since he was elected in 2014. But despite the fact that we had the 2008 recession, and we saw house prices increase exponentially, States Assemblies didn't provide any intervention for islanders. There was no demand-side constraint in the implementation of policy. And of course, what this has led to is spiralling house prices across the last couple of decades. It has meant affordability for the middle class is no longer a reality to own a home in Jersey. And that is regrettable, because we have already seen many people leaving Jersey because they aspire to be a homeowner and they need to go elsewhere to achieve this dream. And now, sir, I just want to touch on the contents of my report, because it is a bit wordy, and for some members there might be a bit of difficulty in understanding some of the things that I explained in the report. But first thing is first, sir, when I mention about marginal efficiency of capital, that is the rate of return that an investor would gain from any investment over the rate of over the rate that one borrows at. And so when we turn to the financial crash in 2008, we saw the base rate be lowered, we saw commercial rates also lower as well, and so that meant credit became cheaper. And so people were able to invest, and they were able to then generate a good return on investment. Now, because we experienced demand pull inflation in Jersey's housing market, that meant there was upward pressure in Jersey's housing market, both in purchasing and rental terms. Now, for many people who were living in the private sector in particular, there was an explicit rent. What that basically means is the landlord took out a mortgage, a buy-to-let mortgage. Now, most banks, what they do is they set out conditions. Usually it would be a 25% downward payment. Some, however, have lowered that to about 20%. So what this really shows is that many people, despite the fact that the housing market was distorted and there was upward pressure in house prices, many people were still able to afford that 20% downward payment or that 25% downward payment. And as we see in the 2021 census, when we look at owner-occupied units, social housing rent units, and qualified private rent units, the biggest increase was in qualified private rent. That saw an additional 2,933 additional units. That was double the increase of owner-occupied units across the period of 2011 to 2021. And what this really shows is, due to credit being very cheap, many people were seeking to generate an economic rent, unearned income for themselves, because they could afford to do it. It was a very attractive investment, investing in housing. However, when we do go through the business cycle, and in some cases, as we've seen previously as well, when credit becomes more expensive, it's more difficult to achieve that marginal efficiency of capital, and therefore housing transactions tend to reduce, especially with those who are investing in second or additional units. Now, I also just want to touch on the relationship of personal income tax and wealth as well, because for some people who've already paid for their home outright, they no longer have an explicit rent, they no longer have a debt obligation, their income savings therefore increase. And so their ability to invest is obviously increased because they can invest more readily compared to, say, somebody who is paying a rent, and they've also got to try and increase their income saving to get on to the property ladder. And there's also difficulty in affording that downward payment. In most cases, it's 10%. There have, however, been instances where, with some first-time buyers, they've had, say, a 5% downward payment required, and that obviously helps them, but it means there is a greater mortgage repayment for them at 95% of the market price that they need to then pay off for the remainder of the mortgage life compared to, say, 90%. Now, so with the Fiscal Policy Panel, they touched on those who are the higher income earners, and it was also alluded to that it tends to be the higher income earners who tend to invest in property. Now, because Jersey levies lower personal income tax rates, it means a person's net income is therefore going to be increased compared to an income equivalent who might be, say, in the UK, Scotland or Wales. Now, when we look at, for instance, Scotland, they've got a stamp duty surcharge of 8%. In the UK, it's a 5% stamp duty surcharge. Now, Jersey's housing market is far worse than both Scotland and the UK. So in terms of housing affordability for Middle Jersey, well, let's face it, it's not really affordable, is it? Unless we provide a provision, such as maybe with the First Step scheme, to provide a larger downward payment, so then the mortgage repayments tend to be cheaper. Now, the banks tend to have quite stringent criteria. It tends to be, if you want to borrow, then it's probably about 5 times your income, your household income. In some cases, with some of the credit lenders, it might be the case that you can lend up to 6 times your income. Even then, many people are struggling. And so many individuals end up being in a situation where they are perpetual renters, and the reality of entering home ownership has really diminished for many of those individuals. And I think that is a very unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in. And also you need to look at the lifetime of that household. If you, for instance, enter home ownership, then at least you can say, well, the state doesn't need to cover private rent for the individual compared to those who end up as perpetual renters, who then are pensioners, for instance, and the government's still got to expend money on that household. Plus, you've also got to incur the transfer payments. So in the long run, it's actually more expensive for the government. Now, many people who enter home ownership enter a negative net wealth position. And what this basically means is their debt liabilities exceed that of the assets that they own outright. And many individuals who are first-time buyers, for instance, find themselves in this position when compared to, for instance, individuals who've got a number of different properties, and for some, they're able to buy a property outright as a cash buyer. And so for them, their debt liabilities tend to be minimal compared to those who are competing in the market to enter home ownership. And so that's what many people are having to contend with, unfortunately. Now, so I also just want to touch on the base rate and commercial lending rates as well. It's been quite conspicuous ever since we came into office. We constituted the Assembly on the 27th of June 2022. The base rate at that time was 1%. It then went up to 1.25% and then again up to 1.75%. But there were these continued hikes in the base rate, all the way up to 5.25%. But during the first year that we served in office, commercial lending rates were obviously cheaper because the base rate was so low. And the reason why the Bank of England, or shall we say the Monetary Policy Committee, the reason why they set the base rate at the rates they do is to ensure that if any commercial bank is wanting to lend, then there is a rate that is set and they know how much that rate will be if they are to then borrow. And then there's obviously repayments that the commercial banks have to then incur as well. So when we're looking at a higher base rate, it's to take out demand in the economy. But as we have seen empirically, when credit has become cheaper, that tends to lead to demand pull inflation in the housing market. And we've seen in the last 38 years, since 1986, when housing data was provided for, in 1989, 1998, 2008, and 2021, the house price index showed that there was an increase in prices that exceeded 16%. But then afterwards, there was a massive drop for each year. And hence, this has been reflected with house prices seeing the biggest drop since records begun. But that has happened on 3 occasions previously, so it comes as no surprise. I know there has often been this rhetoric that has been seen in the media. However, I do believe it, sir, to be misleading to some extent, sir. Now, sir, I do have quite a few graphs in front of me, sir. And I think it's important that I turn to these graphs, because in 2023, 49% of flats that were sold to persons who were acquiring property as a second or additional unit. In quarter 2, it was 41%. In quarter 3, went down a bit to 14%. And in quarter 4, it was 37%. Now, the first, second, and fourth quarter saw more units acquired as second or additional units compared to those first-time buyers entering home ownership. That is the precise problem that we have. Because house prices tend to obviously be cheaper when we're looking at, say, 1- or 2-bedroom units, it's easier for people to put up that 25% downward payment.
So I wonder if the Deputy could just give way and remind us which year he's talking.
2023.
Thank you.
Sorry. I forgot.
Yes, all right. Please carry on.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Sorry about that. Sorry, through the chair, sir. So this is showing that during a period when commercial rates were lower compared to the rates that have been set now, there was obviously incessant demand and people were still investing in second homes. That, though, has petered off gradually, as we can see, with commercial rates having increased across the period of 2024 in particular. But now we have seen the Monetary Policy Committee take the decision to gradually reduce the base rate. It was at 5.25%, now it's about 4.5%. And at the moment, as I saw with the recent minutes that were published, the Monetary Policy Committee are obviously very cognizant about the inflationary pressures within the UK economy, and also the international pressures as well, as we see with, say, Donald Trump with the news that he's implementing a 25% tariff, etc. So, of course, there are many things that we need to consider. However, we are on this path where there is an expectation that the base rate is forecast to drop to about 3.5% by early 2026, probably in about the first, potentially the second quarter of 2026. Now, I just want to touch on the number of transactions that have gone through the Royal Court, because I think this is very good information that the Statistics Jersey publish. Now, the information that I have in front of me shows the proportion of sales that go through the Royal Court with a loan. So, for instance, in 2014, 68% of transactions had a loan. 2015, 61%. 2016, 60%. 2017, 61%. And again, it tends to hover around that figure of between 60 to 70%. And what this basically means is all the other transactions have gone through the Royal Court, and it's been cash buyers who've been acquiring property without any loan. So what this really shows is that there is a degree of wealth in Jersey, wealth investment. And so there is no need for certain individuals, for instance, to go up to a credit lender to acquire a buy-to-let mortgage because they can buy a property outright. Now, this in some respects may be beneficial because at least it's probably more negotiable because there is no explicit rent made payable between the tenant and the person who owns a property, that potentially you might be able to agree a reduced rent. Whereas when we're looking at, for instance, some of the buy-to-let mortgages, that has to be serviced, and unfortunately it's the tenant who's going to have to pay that. And of course, as we see with some of the rates at the moment, they are very expensive. There tends to be an introduction of, say, a fixed term of maybe 2, maybe 3 years, and thereafter it goes up to, say, a variable rate in some cases. But of course, each credit lender will provide different services. But what I can say is for somebody who is looking to enter home ownership as a first-time buyer, usually the rates tend to be lower compared to that of, say, a buy-to-let mortgage, where the rates tend to be more expensive. And so what that means is some individuals are paying those rents, and their ability to save is also impacted as well. And so for them to enter home ownership, due to there being that incessant demand pull inflation that we have seen in Jersey's housing market in recent times, makes it very difficult for them to then afford a downward payment. Now, sir, it's important for me to also just to remind members that when we're looking at 1- and 2-bedroom units, in the recent report that was published by Statistics Jersey, we have actually seen the mean price for a 1- and 2-bedroom increase over that compared to the third quarter of 2024. And because we're on that path now where we're looking at the base rate being in a position where it's inclined to reduce, also that will see changes with the commercial rates as well. In fact, a couple of the credit lenders have already made announcements to that effect in the UK. But I just want to also touch on the fact that there has been this unfortunate trend, especially when we are looking at the private rental sector with some of the statistics that have been published, due to the fact that we have seen 2,933 additional units come onto the private rental market. When we look at lower income households living in rental stress, in 2009 and 2010, about 43% of those households were living in rental stress. In 2014, it increased up to 82%, and in 2021, it remained at 82%. So what this really shows is that there are many people who are struggling in Jersey. And in some cases, those individuals, they don't really have any choice but to pay the rent because, again, you've got an individual or individuals who own the property. They've got a buy-to-let mortgage, and that debt needs to be serviced. And so it makes it even more difficult for those individuals. Now, with some of the rates that are levied, and I know Deputy Mezek has highlighted this about the 5% rental cap, but a few of the rates that are currently being used actually exceed that across the mortgage life. And so there potentially could be some amendments potentially to the law, I don't know, or there potentially might be some discussion, I would imagine, about credit lender regulation in regard to the rates that are set, sir. But for me, it is very much a concern because even before I even decided to come into politics, I was very much adamant at one point in time that I had no choice but to leave the island because it was so expensive. Unfortunately, I've seen a few of my friends leave Jersey already, and a couple of them intend to do so in the near future. And for me, I was in a position where I was working as a personal trainer, working very hard. I also had a full-time job, and I was then just seeing house prices at the time spiral out of control, and I knew I wasn't earning enough to even meet the criteria that was set by major banks in the island, and I wasn't in a position to then obtain any borrowing. And so I found myself in a very difficult situation, as many young people have done as well, and they still do, where I had to contemplate, well, what do I want to do with my future? And in the end, I said, look, I will stand, and hopefully I'm elected. Hopefully I can try and enact change to try and represent the voices of the young people in this island. And I've tried to do that as best as I can. Sometimes I've been successful, sometimes I've had my failures as well. But for me, I am very worried about the housing crisis that exists. And unfortunately, it's going to be many people who are part of my generation who are going to end up being perpetual renters. And when we become older, what's going to happen? Many of us are going to need care. There's not going to be any assets, for instance, that you can dispose of to then pay off debt obligations. So the government's going to be incurring huge levels of social expenditure in the future, and I think this is frightening. And I'm very scared, I must say, about our young children today. What is their future going to be like? And also the yet to be born. We have to think ahead of time. We do. Obviously, I know we've only got a 4-year political cycle, but the States Assembly must plan ahead because there are many, many issues. And if they are not addressed now, then of course those issues will become exacerbated in the future and it will be too late to do anything. So, sir, I think I've made the points that I intended to make, sir, and I would like to open the debate. Thank you, sir.
Well, is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the stated goal of this proposition is to further dampen demand in this part of the housing market, i.e. the buy-to-let section, but this move would be not only unnecessary but counterproductive. It risks weakening market and economic confidence at a time when market correction is underway and there are signs of stabilisation in house prices and private rents. We can all acknowledge that the housing market has already been through a significant shift. When the current 3% higher rate of stamp duty was introduced in 2023, it was intended to reduce the demand for second homes, buy-to-let properties and holiday homes, and to rebalance the market towards owner-occupiers and first-time buyer households. Since the peak in 2022, property prices have fallen by 10%. The number of transactions is down by 16%, interest rates have risen significantly, and while they have come down and may come down further, they are unlikely to return to the historic lows of the 2010s. This means that the intervention we put in place 2 years ago is working. The housing market is cooling. First-time buyers have better opportunities to take their first step onto the property ladder, and private rents are beginning to stabilise. The proposition before us, however, seeks to go further at a time when the market is already in a correction phase. This is an unnecessary intervention that risks damaging confidence, discouraging investment, and even reducing the supply of private rental properties at a time when many islanders rely on them. We all want to support home ownership, but we must also recognise the importance of a strong and stable private rental sector. Many islanders are not yet in a position to buy, and they depend on a well-functioning rental market. As we've just seen in our debate earlier this afternoon, there are also, of course, people who live here in Jersey who cannot buy because of their housing and work status. They also need rental properties. And we have to also reflect, sir, that there are many people who come to Jersey on a short-term basis, like I did in 1996 for a year, who want rental property and not to buy straight away. Some people need to find their feet in Jersey before they start to buy, and we have to have a good supply of rental properties. The current 3% rate already strikes a fair balance. It discourages excessive speculation, but still allows for investment in the rental market. If we push this rate to 5%, we risk discouraging landlords from maintaining or expanding their rental properties, potentially reducing supply and driving rents higher, hurting the very people this measure claims to help. Proponents of this measure suggest it could generate an additional 1.2 million in revenue. It's important, however, to emphasise that this amount may not be realised due to uncertainty about the behavioural response and effect on people's willingness to purchase buy-to-let properties, second homes and holiday homes. If the effect of the proposition is to deter people buying such properties, we will not see any additional revenue, nor will we see buy-to-let properties coming onto the rental market. Furthermore, there is a real risk of market distortion. If buyers rush to complete purchases before the new rate takes effect, we could see an artificial spike in transactions this year, followed by a further slump in 2026. That kind of market instability is not what responsible policy making should encourage. Instead of further tinkering with stamp duty, we should focus on practical solutions to improve housing affordability. That is why this government is supporting initiatives such as the Housing Minister's First Step scheme and Andium Homes' development of new affordable housing. These policies address the root causes of the housing challenge, boosting supply, improving affordability and helping first-time buyers without unnecessarily penalising investment. So it's also worth noticing that States of Jersey Development Company are also developing schemes to help first-time buyers and to help people move up on the housing ladder, as are indeed some private sector developers. We must govern with prudence and common sense. The current 3% higher rate of stamp duty is, I suggest to members, doing its job. Prices are stabilising, first-time buyers are seeing better opportunities, and the rental market remains intact. Increasing the surcharge to 5% is a step too far, and I urge members to reject this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I was hoping you could give a ruling on how to interpret the proposition, if I may ask of you.
If I can. What is the question?
The question is, the proposition as worded does not mention surcharge, nor does it suggest a rise in stamp duty. It says, for example, to take one of the three taxes, that stamp duty for a property that is not a purchaser's principal residence should be increased to 5%. It does not suggest increasing the surcharge rate to 5%. Now, I understand, so we have to take propositions as they are worded and not infer what's being proposed here. Yes. I just wondered if you could rule what the intended outcome would be: stamp duty on those who did not have or purchasing a property that was not their principal residence would be 5%. And there is no reference in this to a surcharge or to the fact that this is about the surcharge within the wording of the proposition at all.
That is true. If you look at the first line of the report, the 3% stamp duty surcharge was introduced. It's quite clear that it seems to me that that what is being proposed is an increase to 5%. Now, you're right, it doesn't say the word surcharge within the proposition itself. And I'm not in a position to say what significance there is in the difference, but my interpretation would be that what is intended is to increase from 3% to 5% on the first figure mentioned in the report, which is the surcharge.
So just for our clarity, we are assuming that what's in the report is what's intended, notwithstanding the proposition does not use the same wording. That's your ruling. It's clear enough, but ultimately it's not in the proposition.
Well, I'm assuming, Deputy Andrews, that what you intended was the surcharge, was quite to 5% surcharge. It seems to me that if I read the proposition by itself as if there were nothing, there is no mention of a surcharge. But if I read it in the context of the proposition as a whole, it is an increase from 3% to 5% of the surcharge. Now, if you intend something different, Deputy Andrews, then you probably need to go away and come back again. But that's my ruling for the purposes of this debate. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. I want to express some concerns regarding the current proposal to increase the stamp duty, land transaction tax, and envelope property transaction tax to 5% for properties that are not the purchaser's principal residence. Now, I want to acknowledge that in the past, I brought forward an amendment to increase this figure to 10% of stamp duty. At that time, I was unsure of where the housing market and interest rates were heading. I believed it might be a necessary measure, but looking back, I can admit that the timing wasn't right for my proposal. I was, after all, responding to a market that was shifting and evolving, and I believe it's good that the approved percentage was 3% as it stands today. Additionally, having a stamp duty tax for second residential property, it provides useful data to the Treasury, allowing us to know the level of such ownership. The 3% has, in my opinion, done its job. It had a significant impact without overwhelming the market. Now we find ourselves at a point where this proposal suggests raising the rate to 5%. While I understand the reasoning behind this, I believe the timing is not right again. The 3% has worked. It has already provided a measure of pacing the second property market, and I believe now is not the time to increase that pressure and create unintended consequences. We also need to consider that if we were to raise this tax now, we would be removing a crucial tool for future use. If down the line we see the need to slow down the second residential property market again, we would no longer have the ability to use this mechanism effectively. And that's a point we also need to think about. Therefore, I believe this proposal is not the right step at this moment. I fully appreciate the intentions behind it, but we must recognize that 3% is already achieving the intended results. Increasing it to 5% now could put unnecessary strain on the market, and it would take away a tool that we might need to use in the future when circumstances change. I therefore ask you all to consider the long-term effects of this decision and to think carefully about whether now is the right time to take this step. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? No other member wishes to speak.
Sir,
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm not going to speak for long, but members will recall that in the budget debate, I sought to reduce the surcharge, not increase it. I also had a, quite understandably, an amendment to this proposal rejected by the GREF out of, I wrote it out of frustration, but understanding why the Deputy is bringing this proposition. And I want to say, firstly, that I don't think that we should criticise the Deputy for a lot of the remarks that he is saying, because he is speaking on behalf of so many islanders. And we are seeing, we had a debate that was very different earlier on the work and housing law. The island has been for as long as I've been a member, and as long as there are photographs in the coffee rooms, members of a photograph there of a problem of immigration in Jersey. We're seeing immigration, and we're seeing people like Deputy Andrews' friends leaving the island because they have no hope, no prospect of getting on the housing ladder. And that, as a Jersey person, everybody is a Jersey person, irrespective of whether they've been here for just arrived, and they work and they contribute to the island and they're going to get their qualifications after 10 years. They are a Jersey person, and we need to build communities. And this island has always built communities, a patchwork of different people. And the frustration that I have is that the Deputy has to resort to this kind of proposition, which, as well-intentioned as it ultimately is intended, I'm afraid to say to the Deputy that it doesn't work. But there is a solution. And I know that many of the Deputy's friends and people that he knows, and many young families in St Saviour, sir, are the amount of properties that have got dual to mum and dad, having elder children living at home, sometimes with families themselves, because they can't get onto the property ladder. They can't even afford to rent, or they're trying to save for a deposit. That's normally the reason why they're actually, I think we call them concealed households in the statistics. But those are families which are people trying to save up for a deposit, trying to meet the lending criteria the Deputy speaks about. There are countless examples over the decades in this place and in other parliaments around the world that have tried to deal with the issue of rising house prices. And I understand it, I think. I've lived with this debate for years. And in past times, we've done something about it that works. The only way, and the Deputy spoke of a demand problem. I think what he meant to say with that is that there were too many people chasing properties because there wasn't a sufficient amount of supply. And I would cite, sir, I haven't been able to get the copyright permission because it's behind a paywall, but there was an article in last week's Economist magazine which explained exactly why this sort of policy just doesn't work. And we haven't even started with the Housing Minister's proposals on rental markets, but that will be an issue for another day. There's clearly a friction in the Council of Ministers, a rupture in the Council of Ministers. We've seen that this afternoon. We've seen the early movements of it, where there is a real split within this council. And I urge the Chief Minister to try and unify his council, because he has directly opposing rules and deals deals are done for political expedience. I don't mean that in any disproportionate way, sir, but deals are done politically to get things through this Council of Ministers, and it's rather uncomfortable for me to see that and to hear it as a backbencher. The real issue, I say to the Deputy, and I will be rejecting it, and I will be bringing back my proposition, sir, to do what the Council of Ministers actually wanted to do, which was to reduce the surcharge, because they knew it wasn't working, and we had the extraordinary position, the absolutely extraordinary position that a government brought forward an amendment to mine, which I wanted to scrap it, and they wanted to bring it down to 2%, and that didn't get through because of some voting thing that I don't quite understand. Do we have a government? Do we have collective responsibility? I'm not sure what we've got, sir. All I know is it's failing the public of the island. And what I say very kindly to Deputy Andrews is, does he have any idea of the unintended consequence he has had through the market, which is already absolutely stagnant? Any idea that the Treasury Ministers are going to get a penny or a pound, a decimal place, 10% of her so-called surcharge revenue that was put in the budget last year is for the birds, sir. It's an April Fool. It's not coming in because they've basically killed the property market for buy-to-lets. They've killed it. Stone dead. Nobody in their right mind, sir, is going to be wanting to borrow money if they've got it. And there's nothing wrong, sir, with mums and dads or people with a pension pot investing in Jersey in property which is going to provide a private rental accommodation, which the government doesn't have to provide with their social renting properties. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with having a strong, well-functioning private sector rental market of supply. The tragedy, sir, is that we've got, for the first time, and I've been very in discussions on Friday with the Constable of St Helier, speaking about the very significant amount of 1 and 2 and bedroom properties being built in St Helier. They are going unsold. There's a huge amount of properties unsold. And that's a real shame. It's a real shame because it's not giving the opportunity of people to get onto the ladder of what Deputy Andrews wants to do. And therefore, it's gumming up the whole system. I sometimes wonder, sir, whether I actually live in two universes, sir, whether I live in this States Assembly where we talk about ourselves and we talk about lovely things and I get up and talk too often and people get cross, but whether or not I'm actually talking about the real things or trying to, in my inevitable way, sir, speaking about the real issues of islanders that are out there. The housing market is completely stuck. We've got people wanting to sell their home, needing to sell their homes, and they can't sell it. We've got people that want to downsize into apartments that can't sell their family home. The market is completely stagnant. And Deputy Andrews doesn't mean it, but I've had people ringing up who know I'm interested in this sort of thing, say, what's going to happen? Are the states going to do? Members outside actually, a lot of the general public don't actually know who's ministers and who isn't ministers. They think it's just the States Assembly. So, sorry if that's going to hurt the egos of some ministers, but they don't actually know. They don't. They're getting on with their lives and being normal. So, and
why do they know who the bailiff is?
Yes, well, I don't think they know who you are, sir. Sometimes because you're supposed to be non-political, sir. You're a judge as well. Anyway, they read about you in the paper and other things, sir. But that's another thought. That's another subject. The fact is that there is no way of tinkering the issue apart from dealing with supply of homes. No amount of tinkering with new taxes, keeping existing taxes, is going to solve the problem that the Deputy is trying to do. We don't have enough of the right type of homes. We don't have enough family homes for people to buy or rent. Supply is key, and we're falling short. The Bridging Island Plan was the glaring, horrendous example of what the last Assembly did so very wrong. And before members of Reform pop up, they voted against every single one of the rezoning propositions, every single one of them. The lack of foresight in making the planning minister have a sufficient amount of land, and that includes brownfield land owned by the states of Jersey. So I know the Minister for Infrastructure, I know the previous one and the current one. I hope he's looking at all his lovely brownfield sites to try and get that on for housing development. I know he's going to be doing that, and I know his predecessor did. I congratulate them for that. But of course, we've got a glue of a planning system that is incredibly difficult for the minister, even though he's making valiant attempts to make it work. We've got a BAT survey that's needed, and this, that, and the other, and it's very difficult. We're seeing construction firms going completely out of business, and we're not seeing anything being built. I was delighted, sir. I told the constable of St Saviour, I said, delighted that we'd actually got some homes done next to Saint-Chen. And then I started looking at the Andim website, and then I looked at confidential.je, and I saw just how many family homes Andim have sold off in the parish of St Saviour. Saint-Chen, sold off. Grasset Park, there's one on the market at the moment for 695,000. I say, sir, that it's not good enough for this government to say that their first step scheme is working. It ain't working. It is not working. And we're letting families down. We're letting renters down. We're letting islanders down by not doing the right things with basically the decisions that this assembly can make. And I'm very well aware that I'm going to irritate members by saying some of the home truths that maybe they need to hear. We've got plenty of flats. There's lots of them. We want them rented, but nobody's going to buy them, not with a 3% surcharge on the whole amount, let alone a 5%. It's not a stamp duty that's escalated on the ladder system, like a previous Treasury Minister didn't do the cliff edge, so that you didn't have 3% on the first bit. Then if you go over up to another 100,000, you go up to 5%. No, it's a very gradual increase. Stamp duty holiday is what I wanted to do in my amendment to this. I was going to put A, B and C, saying state agents cut their rates to 0.5%, get the market moving. Banks, to qualify, you get no stamp duty on a first-time buyer home, providing the estate agent only charged 0.5%, and you got bank and a mortgage at only 1% above that of the UK, because the Financial Services Minister hasn't brought in the banks and said, why aren't you putting the rates, notwithstanding the fact that we're a credit island and we got all this thing, why is the External Relations and Financial Services Minister not bringing the bank in to say why are our mortgage rates so high? Because they are. And everything is mitigating against it. And the government is coming with their half-hearted approach. 1 minute bringing a half-baked proposal to cut my surcharge down to 2% in the budget. Then the state's throwing that out. Next minute we have mixed messages on the last debate about whether or not we want 2-1-Es, people investing in Jersey. And the whole thing is completely, absolutely bonkers. And we're going to be arriving at the next election, and we're going to be, and we're all tarred with the same brush, sir. Because members really, we have to basically say, well, what have you done? And what have we done to improve the lot of housing in Jersey? Well, we haven't done anything, really. Nothing. We're seeing construction companies going bust. We've got the illusion Andim's the only thing that's building anything. Great. I'm a huge supporter of Andim. I think I was responsible for setting it up and getting the £200 million for actually borrowing and doing up their refurbishments. But what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing in terms of really dealing with the underlying concerns that Deputy Andrews has? Raising the surcharge, I'm afraid, won't fix it. It'll make matters worse. It's going to push more rental properties off the market in precisely the area where you actually want the market to work, where there's a surplus. Markets adjust. If you try and hold back if Kincanute tried to do something and it didn't work. If you try and basically follow the housing minister's proposals of crowding out, because he said it in this assembly, sir, crowding out all the private rental market. He doesn't want a private rental market. This is the right way to do it. We've got stagnation in our market. We've got people losing confidence. We've got people wanting to sell their properties that can't. We need to reject this proposition, and instead, this government needs to come forward with a realistic, developable, buildable project to put policies that get shovels in the ground, get building the type of family homes that we need. If that needs a reconsideration of some of the voting that happened in the island plan, where sites were thrown out with imperfect information, and We are not giving any of our young people the hope that they're going to get on the housing ladder. How we help, this is a matter that all members need to be concerned about. And they won't hear me going on about it if they'd actually get on and start voicing and understanding the concerns, the lived experience of people like Deputy Andrews, who don't believe they're ever going to get into home ownership. I'm afraid he's right, but he's wrong in the way that he's doing it. And this Assembly needs an economic development minister that worries about the construction industry, a Treasury minister that worries about taxation that doesn't work, like this surcharge, is not getting money for it at all, and a housing minister that understands that you don't crowd out the private sector rental market. And actually you need wealth creators to grow the island and to grow prosperity. And we're not doing a very good job. So I'm sorry, Deputy Andrews, but there are solutions, but this isn't it.
Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. This is a really nice debate for me because we hear on the one hand Deputy Joseph wanting the surcharge to be reduced and Deputy Andrews wanting the surcharge to be increased. So it gives me an opportunity to boast my moderate centrist credentials in this debate, sir, because I think it ought to stay exactly where it is. It's a shame, sir, that he's not in the room, sir, but I'd come close to using the entire time I have to speak in this debate if I dedicated it all to correcting everything that Deputy Joseph said in his speech, sir. Of course, he lamented the sale of homes at the Sanction and Grasset Park and then boasted of his role in establishing Andium Homes, which he did so on a business plan that required the sale of the Sanction Homes and Grasset Park in order to meet its financial obligations to pay back to the Treasury, something which I opposed at the time. So he also pointed out that Reform Jersey had consistently voted against the rezoning of fields in the Bridging Island Plan debate, but didn't mention that when those amendments were dealt with one way or the other, we voted for the plan, because at the end of it, we knew that it was in the island's interest to do so when it came to that final vote. He talks about the lack of buildings, sir. I live on the border of 3 massive construction sites where I walk past hundreds of homes being built every day, sir, when I leave my home and come to work. And those are homes, sir, I can say that the Maison Les Arches development just by my home has been snapped up really quickly by those who have applied to buy homes there, because it's a fantastic product, really high quality homes there at a more affordable price, sir. Exactly the kind of thing we ought to have been doing years ago, and that I'm glad that we have our foot on the pedal now and are doing. So I know that the stamp duty surcharge for investment purchases has been contentious, and we've seen it in this debate of people who hold opposite views on it. So I defend it as a sensible intervention at its time where we were experiencing massive inflation in house prices, and all of that contributing to what Deputy Andrews, I thought, spoke very well about, which is the fear that young people are feeling from this, sir. Just last week, sir, a very good friend of mine moved from the island, having been planning to do it for a while, and it was the cost of housing, number one thing. I've had that experience myself of losing friends because of it, exacerbated by years of a bubble. But we are seeing the green shoots and seeing things beginning to be corrected. Again, Deputy Joseph talked about how important the role of supply was, and then lamented that we have too much supply and stuff isn't being bought now. Well, one of the consequences of that is last year we saw the biggest fall in house prices since records began. Now that poses challenges in some senses, but opportunities in others. It shows, in my view, that there's a correction taking place after years of a bubble of unsustainable price increases. Things are falling back to a more natural equilibrium, which hopefully will allow more islanders to thrive. So the 3% surcharge introduced when it did, and seeing what happened afterwards, it's difficult to disentangle that from the rise in interest rates. We'll never know for definite which was the more powerful factor in that. But what it has done, sir, is it has reduced buy-to-let purchases, which was a stated intention of that policy. It's not an unintended consequence, it's an intended consequence. And we've seen the proportion of homes being bought by first-time buyers is increasing, and I think so that it will likely increase even further over the coming years. Deputy Kovac reminded us of the debate that had previously taken place about establishing this surcharge at 10%, which I voted for at the time, and did so in good faith, sir, because the surcharge at that point hadn't yet been introduced. We didn't know for definite what would happen at whatever rate it ended up being introduced at. But what we can tell now with 2 years of its existence is that 3% has done the job. And since it's done the job, we don't need to tinker with it. And the reason why I will vote against the proposition that Deputy Andrews has raised, has brought forward, not because I have any kind of ideological opposition to setting the surcharge rate at a higher percentage. I don't. You know, he referred to the UK. They have a higher surcharge rate there. And perhaps in a different economic circumstance, maybe 5% would be more appropriate. But we can see with our own eyes now the impact that the 3% is having, and I just can't imagine what value would be added to that by increasing it. The investors' side of the market has been dampened by 3%. How is it going to actually be dampened any more by 5%? And is that actually what we want at this moment in time? I don't think that it is. And if, for whatever reason, there was deterioration in the economic situation in the coming years, and there was another spike in investment purchases, if we wanted to have at our disposal the option of increasing from 3% to 5%, we wouldn't be able to do so because we'd have already done it at a time that it would have been least effective. So, sir, I think it's better to stick with where we are right now. Keep an open mind for the future, by all means, and keep an eye on economic conditions and whether a higher or lower rate would be sensible. But right at this moment in time, it doesn't seem to me that there is strong evidence that an increase from 3 to 5% would achieve what we would ideally want it to and actually make anything better for islanders. But what Deputy Andrews and Deputy Ozef said about how islanders feel about the housing crisis is absolutely right, and our housing crisis is multifaceted and there's lots of things that need to be done to help address it. That does mean providing more social housing, it does mean providing more first-time buyer housing, and it means using the stock that we already have in all sectors more effectively and providing a better framework for people to have secure and affordable homes from which they and their families can flourish. But I don't see how that situation is made easier or better by increasing the stamp duty surcharge from 3% to 5%, and that's why I'll be opposing it.
All right, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Andrews to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I must thank all members who've contributed to this debate. The expense of credit has obviously been a major deterrent for investors investing in the housing market ever since we reconstituted the States Assembly. In 2021, when credit was very, very cheap, we saw demand obviously pick up, and thereafter we saw a big drop in house prices, according to the House Price Index. And that was the fourth time that we've experienced that in the last 40 years. However, with commercial rates coming down, they're gradually coming down, and of course we know what the policy intent is of the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and the Monetary Policy Committee. They do have an obligation to follow through the government of the day's ambition to deliver increased economic growth, and that's why they are on that path towards lowering the base rate. And obviously that will make it a bit easier for the commercial banks as well to also then lower their rates that they charge borrowers as well. But I just want to touch on a couple of things. I know it's been mentioned about the need for housing stock to accommodate households. But I just want to mention about Jersey's tight labour market. It's not just a tight labour market, it's a very tight labour market. And the reason being is because of the cost of housing. Many people are not attracted to Jersey because they know they're going to be paying higher rents compared to other jurisdictions where they could possibly go and work. Also, they're going to be deprived of the ability to actually saved to a good level. Because we've got such a distortion in Jersey's housing market in terms of housing allocations, but also with prices as well. And that has obviously made the situation worse. Now, the way how I frame it is this. Jersey's housing market is currently in a position of partial market failure. Basically, what that means is there are units available, but the units are insufficient to meet the needs of the working population. And also, when we're looking at prices, there will be more upward pressure in prices, believe it or not, going into 2026 when commercial rates become cheap. And we will see more people investing in second homes. That is going to happen. And actually, that's not going to be very good news, is it, for first-time buyers, the very people that we need to try and assist into home ownership. So for me, is a stamp duty surcharge warranted? Absolutely. Why would you be investing in a market to deprive somebody else of owning their own home? That's a question that all of us should be asking, especially when house prices are so high in Jersey compared to, for instance, the UK. Now, obviously, London, there are similar prices to Jersey. But this is the reason why there isn't really much hope, is there, for our young people. You just need to read that Channel 103 article. I think it was published 2 or 3 days ago. And look at the statistics. Look how many people, young people as well, who don't see Jersey as their long-term home. They want to go, they want to explore life. I understand that. I think all young people should try and do that. But they're not going to be coming back here, most of them. Why? Because it's too expensive to live. And they'd be better off going elsewhere. They can enjoy their life. They won't have to be paying excessive rents or excessive mortgage repayments because there's been so much demand in the market previously. And I just don't think that's really fair. But we are where we are, and I think there are going to be some long-term implications for the island economy, and it will be for future states' assemblies to deal with. And unfortunately, I don't know how we're going to get to grips with it. I really don't. And I do fear some of the problems that are only going to get worse. Now, I know there's been mention about the First Step scheme as well. But the First Step scheme, the reason why it was created was because there was a market problem. Affordability was an issue. And therefore, the government had to step up, they had to intervene, and they had to help households who, again, were not able to match the credit lender's mortgage criteria. So actually, it's going to be costing us more in the long run because previous states' assemblies haven't been doing their job. The stamp duty surcharge should have been implemented a long time ago. And you've got to ask questions, well, what were they doing? What were previous Treasury ministers doing? It was only in 2023 that it actually came into force, a stamp duty surcharge. And even then, when commercial rates were cheaper, and I've just read out the number of transactions that were from non-main residency purchases compared to first-time buyers, and most of whom were actually individuals acquiring a second or additional home. Now, we're going to see that this happen once again. You know, once we go into 2026, and actually once we go into next term as well, the housing market, it will pick up. It's a cyclical relationship that we see. You know, we've seen it in the past where we've seen a massive spike in house prices, but then it soon goes down the year after, and then it stabilises, and then it goes back up again. Now, I don't think we're going to be seeing a repeat of low interest rates like we have seen, for instance, after the financial crisis and COVID-19, because, again, we saw the base rate go down to about 0.25%. That was very, very low. But what we will be seeing is definitely more demand, because people do want to be generating a good return on their investment. And as soon as they know they can do that, they're going to be looking at all the different commercial lenders. And if there's one that they feel provides a good rate, they're going to go with them. And once again, we're going to see demand pick up. And it's going to be first-time buyers who are going to be priced out of the market to individuals who potentially got a monopoly of homes that they own. And I don't think that's fair. Now, I know Deputy Joseph also mentioned about the building trade, and I know that's obviously an area of real importance. But there is one policy that I do want to touch upon, and that's about where a developer is bringing forward 50 or more units on a development. They need to provide affordable housing. Now, the conversations that I've had on about 3 or 4 occasions is very much this. People are going to be planning a development with less than 50 units, and the reason being is because they don't want to impact their economic profit. They don't want to see any losses, so they come in at 42 or 43 units to avoid that policy. And that has also been an issue, and I don't know if the Council of Ministers are aware of it, but it is certainly going to be a problem because, again, we're not really seeing those scaled developments coming forward. So you've got to be really careful about the way how you try and intervene in the market, because sometimes you might be well-purposed, but again, there might be unintended consequences. So I think I've made all the points that I need to. I feel that the young people in Jersey, they need a voice, and I hope to be that voice. And I think it's a good cause, and I think it's very much warranted that 5% stamp duty surcharge is introduced. We've got to be a bit more aggressive in addressing Jersey's housing crisis, and it's much worse in Scotland, it's much worse in the UK. However, we've got a 3% stamp duty surcharge, and it hasn't really been put to the test because it's the expense of credit. That has been the deterrent, not the stamp duty surcharge as such. So I think I'll leave it there and I'll call for the appel, sir.
Thank you very much. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on increased stamp duty for properties that are not principal residences to 5%. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated. 3 votes pour, 41 votes contre, 1 abstention.
Those members voting pour, the Connétable of St Martin and Deputies Labby and Andrews.
Sir, and the abstention, please.
The Connétable of St Clement abstained.
Very well. The next item is Draft Elections Appointed Date Jersey Act P.16, lodged by the Chair of PPC. Main responder is the Chair of Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. There's an amendment lodged by Deputy Moore. Connétable, do you accept the amendment or not?
No, sir.
Very well. Then we'll deal with the amendment separately, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
Draft Elections Appointed Day Jersey Act 2000, the States make this Act under Article 6.3 of the States of Jersey Law 2005 and Article 2.3 of the Connétable Jersey Law 2008.
Connétable.
Thank you, sir. In making the decision to change election day from a Wednesday to a Sunday, the committee noted that despite best efforts of the state's GREF, Vote JE, and the Jersey Electoral Authority, voter turnout remained low at the last election. The committee has looked at other jurisdictions where the voter engagement is higher and recognised that in many, particularly France and Portugal, and many other places, especially France and Portugal, elections take place on a weekend. Although the electorate currently can vote early via pre-poll or apply for postal votes, both of which offer flexibility for those who may not be available to vote on election day itself, the take-up of both these options is relatively low. And in recent times, elections have been held midweek on a Wednesday. A study by postdoctoral research fellows at Griffith University, Australia in February 2024 posed the question, which day of the week gets the most people to vote? Thousands of international elections were analysed. In general, voting takes place on weekends, more than 60% of elections, with Sunday being the preferred date. The date on which the fewest elections are held is a Friday. And when agreeing that we would propose a Sunday as a polling day, PPC looked carefully at which date would be the most suitable, and after much deliberation, the 7th of June was agreed as the most practical date. An April election would not, as suggested, allow members, and I quote, to fully focus on the Liberation Day and not be distracted by the last few weeks of election campaigning, especially where they have responsibility for organising liberation events or unexpectedly lose their seat. Easter is Sundays next year is on the 5th of April. So the Easter weekend is the 3rd to 6th of April, and the school holidays only finish on the 20th of April. I feel that addressing the amendment, that there would be, the school holidays are not the best time to be campaigning house to house, as this will disenfranchise a lot of parents, fathers and mothers and carers who may want to stand for election, as taking a school-aged child around with you from door to door is probably not what the child would want, and not the best use of time, and would prove difficult they would find the added stress of finding childcare during holiday time would not be beneficial to their polling. May the 9th is a month before June the 7th, so there's a large gap and a clear month for canvassing and electioneering. And I really don't think the public pay much notice as to who is attending Liberation. This year is the 80th anniversary, in May 2025. And May 2026, it's the 81st anniversary. So next year will be a scaled down event. I do maintain that June the 7th is a far better time to hold elections, and I'd also like to add that just as I thought this would be helpful, the history of polling dates is as follows from 2018. Elections were first held in the spring in 2018. The polling day was Wednesday, 16th of May 2018. The nomination meetings were held on the 10th and 11th of April, so candidates, including sitting states members, were campaigning in early May, including over Liberation Day. Easter Sunday was April the 1st in 2018. In 2022, following comments about the 2018 date, the polling day was moved to the 22nd of June in 2022 to avoid Liberation Day. The nomination period under the JEA, Jersey Electoral Authority, for the first time, opened on Wednesday 11th of May and closed on Friday 13th of May, with candidates announced on Wednesday the 18th of May 2022. In the proposition to the states at that time, P.16 2021, Draft Constitution of the States and Public Elections Jersey Law, the PPC report of that time said, "The other change we feel it is necessary is to move the date of the next election back by a month into June 2022. The elections in 2018 were the first to be held in the spring. The committee has listened to feedback from the public and parishes regarding the suitability of a mid-May as our general election day. The impact of Easter, the May Bank holiday, and of course the Liberation Day made the election period particularly difficult in 2018 on a practical level, and the committee suggested a shift to June will not only provide for an uninterrupted 5-week run between nomination night and election day, but will allow there to be a discrete proroguing period as agreed by this Assembly. 2026, Sunday 7th of June 2026 is proposed for the next election. And this was done in consultation with, as I've said, in 2018, it was held in May. 2022, the PPC listened to the people and decided that June was actually the date that we should hold the election. I will speak more on the main debate, but I would just like to say that PPC has researched this. Sunday, the 7th of June, we think it is, there's not such a thing as a perfect day, but it is the best day to hold this election. Thank you, sir.
So you move the proposition. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Very well. We have an amendment to the proposition lodged by Deputy Moore. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 6, Article 1, for the 7th of June 2026, substitute the 26th of April 2026.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. Sir, whilst I welcome the proposed change to a weekend election, I ask the Assembly to consider the overall work of government and perhaps the slightly hurried impact of our election date following the last elections and the formation of the government back in 2022. So it is absolutely imperative that we do as much as we can to turn around the desperately low levels of civic engagement in our community. But I would like to propose this alternative approach to the election date as a positive impact on that level of civic engagement. And I will set out later to members how I think the April date would achieve that. So first, let's look at the practicalities of the work of government and the work of scrutiny, particularly after an election. There is, of course, as members are aware, so much to do to set a common strategic policy and a government plan. Time is of the essence, and to enable a new government to bring forward a new programme and to allow time for the scrutiny of it, an earlier election will make a great deal of difference. It will allow for greater team building and, I believe, better decision making also. Another benefit of bringing forward this election date is to encourage young people and their families to get involved with the election process throughout the school holidays. It enables people to have more time, not just those who are campaigning. And I have to say to the constable that I have campaigned with young children. They have, on many occasions, canvassed with me on their scooters, and they have very much enjoyed the process. One of them is currently doing a politics A-level, and I believe that his experience growing up in a political household has, of course, sparked that interest within him. But there are people in our wider communities, our supporters, who canvass on our behalf and with us. And they are absolutely critical parts of an election process, and they are to be encouraged, and particularly the younger members of our community, who also can take an interest in the political process at that canvassing time and that campaigning time. And that also helps to drive a greater sense of engagement and involvement in our political process. So, sir, I believe that setting out an election date that is shortly after the close of the school holidays is in fact a benefit to our democratic process. And will encourage younger people to take more interest in the process and to get involved. It must also be said that, as the Constable has mentioned, the rationale behind this proposal, part of it, in holding the elections ahead of Liberation Day, does avoid any discomfort that some might feel by those who are about to begin their election campaigns whilst they're taking part in our National Day of celebration, and do have a greater prominence within our community at that particularly special time. So, sir, this is a minor change, but I do hope that members will agree that there are a number of positive benefits in order to further encourage public engagement in our democratic process, and also to expedite the important work of a new government. And, sir, I move the amendment.
Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? If no member wishes to speak on the amendment, Deputy Joseph.
If nobody else wants to speak, sir, I think the deputy has at least she's taken the trouble to bring this proposition, and it deserves at least the consideration. I can see that there are benefits to having an earlier election. As the former Chief Minister rightly points out, there is a huge amount of work that a new government needs to do. I'm noticing that Easter is very early next year. I always think of Easter in terms of the link to my twin sister's birthday, sir, and I can see that Easter next year is on the Good Friday is on the 3rd of April, and then there's the Easter holidays, and there seems to be the former Chief Minister makes a very good point about the Liberation Day timing, and I think the Deputy has made a thoughtful case about why the elections would be better held earlier. Because it certainly will help the government deal with its onerous obligations to serve people and deliver a corporate strategic plan and all the rest of it, unlike the hurried situations that we found ourselves in. And I can see incredible merit, and would like to know why members might not agree to it, because we're dealing with democracy, and this is a debate about democracy, and it seems to matter, sir, and this seems like a good idea.
Deputy Tadier.
I thought I saw a light on the back row, but I'm not sure if that was to speak.
I didn't see it.
No, it's fine. It was an accident, I think. So that's maybe why I was a bit slow to get up and put my light on. So I think there's a couple of things to say. I think it was said that members of the public wouldn't notice who was there on Liberation Day, but I think it would be noticed if any member who's standing for election wasn't there on Liberation Day. I think we'd be very quick to have people asking, why were you not at Liberation Day? And I think clearly if a member decided, or a potential candidate who's maybe not yet a member, decided that they didn't want to participate in Liberation Day but wanted to go out canvassing, that actually might cause some issue. I'll get round to the way I think that I'll be voting on this, but it has to be said that there could be seen to be a disparity in terms of the ability for non-member candidates who are actively canvassing might have a lot more freedom to go canvassing on Liberation Day and thereabouts, whereas members seeking re-election would probably almost certainly have to give up their day, I'm sure willingly, to attend Liberation festivities, even though they may well be scaled down, which is what the chair of PPC said. So I think the issue that Deputy Moore identifies, I think, is valid. Whether it's sufficiently valid for us to consider changing the election day and therefore shortening the election period is perhaps another question. I personally think that there should be an election in April. Whether it's on the 26th of April or not, I'm not sure, but it should be the election for senators. I think that if maybe PPC had been able to give consideration, or members, to amend this, and I would encourage Deputy Moore that if this doesn't go through today, that she speak to PPC and actually decide whether or not the election for senators can take place, so that it has finished and the results are declared before the nomination period for deputies and constables is open. And I think that would give something of a halfway house to what the deputy is seeking. Because first of all, it means that those 9 senators will have been returned. It means that they can be free or not to attend Liberation Day as they wish to. They could even get pride of place, because they will, of course, have been recently elected, and there'll be people with a strong island-wide mandate, so therefore probably better than other mere mortals who may not get elected at all or only have a partial mandate from the island in Liberation 81. And it would also give an opportunity, of course, for those senators to start potentially deciding whether they want to run for Chief Minister or other lofty ministerial offices whilst the other candidates are preparing for their elections. So I think on balance, I don't see the merit of moving all members to the same election day earlier on. But I do think that the deputy should persist in considering one of the elections to be held in April. So I would simply say that I don't know if indeed if there were 2 elections. I know that's not quite what we're debating, sir, but I'm proposing perhaps a counterfactual about why members might wish to vote against this, but actually keep that option in the future. I have a slight concern, and I've discussed it with de Gref. I understand that there are 2 sides to this argument, that the actual election period is a bit too long. I think it's up to 6 weeks, maybe even going on slightly longer. And from the Greffier's point of view, it is probably necessary to have quite a long lead-in period, because there's a lot of material to present and to prepare. But I think from the public's point of view and from candidates' points of view, you can start getting very quickly into election fatigue, especially indeed, of course, if there's going to be more than 1 election, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And I think actually it would be much more preferable if a shorter election period might be considered. 4 weeks, I think, minimum, but certainly 4.5 to 5 weeks should be the real maximum, as I said, because I think fatigue can set in for all those who are involved.
Thank you very much, Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. So the date that the deputy proposes is just causing me a little bit of concern in regards to the period after an election by which we then select our Chief Minister and take Chief Ministerial nominations. Within PPC, we have been discussing elements around when the return of the vote might take place after a Sunday election due to staff within the Durats, the judicial graph, working into the long hours to make sure the vote is all correct and tabulated, and whether or not that would be released on the Monday directly after, or either on the Sunday night or on the following Monday morning. When we look at Standing Order 115, Sarah, about the nomination period, it's a 3-day, 3 clear working days before the meeting for which the selection is made, which is 5 working days before the minute. So it says a lot of days in there. But the 4th of May, sir, would also be a bank holiday. So this is where I'm getting confused on what day would we be returning a Chief Minister. Would that be on the Friday the 8th, which is the day before Liberation Day, and does that sit comfortably with everybody? Or whether or not we would be voting to have a new bank holiday on either the 8th or the 11th to replace the missed bank holiday, which we usually have for Liberation Day on the 9th. So, sir, it is with this uncertainty that I'm not quite sure how all that works in with the timetable of things, and so why I would be rejecting this amendment.
Very much. Deputy, does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. I'm unfortunately unable to support the amendment, and one of the reasons is it's very much family. Effectively, the 26th of April would mean that 3 weeks of that election period are school holidays. And for any members with children at school, this is their likely only opportunity, especially if they are elected and particularly if they end up in the Council of Ministers. There's every chance they won't get another opportunity for break until December. And so I do think very strongly that members with children should have the opportunity to spend some time with their children, possibly on holiday abroad or just in Jersey, enjoying it in before they enter that election period. And I feel quite strongly about that, sir, that the 26th of April would effectively be very poor for families where one of those families is standing for election. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Just to add to that, I understand that that's often a holiday where often children are studying for exams as well. So I have that additional concern to raise.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Hegarrow.
Thank you, sir. I've been both in and out of government during Liberation, because obviously the first year that we stood for election in 2018, Liberation Day was before the election. In 2022, it was after the it was before the election, sorry, after the election. So I don't necessarily think that Liberation Day should be a factor of when we have the election, from the point of view that some of us will or won't be known, some new candidates will or won't be known. I don't think that necessarily is a factor. My biggest concern, sir, is that in 2021, funding was secured for the project and the review by the Constable of St Martin's in relation to the violence against women and girls. That project was started by the government under John Fondre. It was continued under Deputy Moore's government with Deputy Miles as the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs, and now as the new Minister for Justice and Home Affairs. Sir, it is 6 weeks cut off the opportunity to ensure that that legislation gets through this State Assembly, and that's all I'll say, sir.
Deputy Jones.
Thank you, sir. And I think maybe the Minister before me has alluded to this, but I'm just concerned of us bringing the election date forward, not really focusing on liberation as such, but more about between now and PERDA. We have a lot to do as a State Assembly. The Council of Ministers has a lot to do, and the people of Jersey are expecting something to come out of this term. And we've had a lot of turmoil at different points in the term, and I think that we do need, there are some things that are still there to be brought forward. The Chief Minister alluded to that earlier. In the legislative programme that the council still has to do before PERDA. So for me, really, I'm asking members to reject this as just a citizen of Jersey, so that we can actually get some things done before the end of the term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputies, any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak on the amendment, I close the debate and call upon Deputy Moore to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I'm grateful to those who have expressed their views in this short debate. I always think it's healthy to consider alternative options, and I have found this short debate healthy and interesting in itself. If we look a little further back, sir, I have to say that personally I preferred campaigning for autumn elections. I found the longer evenings running into September were an excellent time for knocking on doors, and people tended to be at home. But it was the decision to move to the spring elections was something that I somewhat regretted. However, it did very much meet the expectations of this amendment, which was to expedite the work of government and to assist the delivery of a government programme. And that is the main rationale for this point. I absolutely hear the points that people make with regards to meeting the school holidays, but as I explained in my opening statement, this is also an opportunity for us to engage with young people and encourage young people to get involved in different election campaigns if there are candidates that they believe in. It can be a very inspiring thing for them to do, and it also offers us or any candidates an opportunity to listen to the young and to ensure that they inspire their work if they are so elected into the future assembly. Of course, as Deputy Jean was just stating, this would make a slightly shorter term for this particular assembly, but I would say to Deputies Lethgoa and Jean that the 6 weeks that we would lose in this government programme is a much lesser time period than the many months that have been delayed by the change of government that has taken place during this term of office. Months and months and months have been wasted in delay and going backwards, changing policy points and changing work that was well in progress. Just this morning we heard from our health minister, who, having campaigned against a health board, is now acknowledging that actually it is a really positive thing. And he also admitted, sir, that our financial recovery programme for the health service has also been delayed and put back by this change in government. And so this assembly has to go to the next elections, taking full responsibility for what it has done to itself, sir, and not for the benefit of the public, who actually were strongly behind the former government. And it held a strong mandate to deliver on its government programme. I don't mean that to be something of a party political broadcast, but I do feel that it is important to acknowledge that delay and that backward movement that has been caused by this assembly. And I think that we will probably see the effects of that when we move to the next election campaigns. So this amendment is brought simply with the hope and aspiration that a new government will be able to have the maximum amount of time to hit the road and deliver a successful new government programme, because it is much, much needed, and I'm sure the public will be looking forward to it just as much as I am. Sir, I hear, even though I'm sorry that I'm not in the Assembly today, I do hear the tone of the Assembly, and therefore I would ask members to please consider this amendment, and I ask for the appel.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the amendment, and I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated. 6 votes pour, 39 votes contre, no abstentions.
6 and 1, please.
6 and 1.
Those members voting for, Deputies Ayer, Osoph, Orr, Wilson, Andrews and Moore.
Very well, we now return to the main proposition in its unamended form. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Osoph.
Well, if nobody else is going to talk about our election day, sir, we have one of the worst voter turnouts in the world. We are really needing this Assembly and all those exciting people that want to stand for the Assembly, whether that's for the position now accepted. It won't get any delay from me, of senators. Electors are going to have a lot to get through, sir, with the electoral information that we're going to have. They're going to have lists of candidates. I don't know, I think my guess is about 20 senatorial candidates, sir, probably quite a lot of them sitting here. And they're going to have deputorial seats and a constable election. So I know that the PPC and the GREF are going to do a great job in all of the work that is necessary to inform the public. And if I may say, sir, irrespective of whether or not people vote for one or not, we need to do so much more to make sure that we engage. The Chief Minister's not listening, unfortunately, but that's often the case. But we actually need...
Something to do with the content, sir.
What we need to do, sir, if I may say, is be able to captivate the interest by outcomes and talking about relevant things that are affecting people's lives, because the lives of people that I speak to are very different from the matters that we attend to in this Assembly, often case, housing crisis, cost of living, etc., harm against schools. And we've got to be relevant in this next election. And if it's on a Sunday, then people are going to have time to review their documentation and which deputies or senators they're going to do, because they're going to have a lot to read, and we need to make it inclusive. If there is one objective, if we could have one objective that is something that all members would agree to, is if we can try and get our voter turnout maybe 10% higher than the last election, we would be even not average in terms of the credibility of the elections, because, sir, you may not like me speaking on every matter, but credibility in democracy and the amount of people that votes each one of us into this Assembly by percentage of not just the turnout, but the people who are entitled to vote, is about the foundation of a credible democracy. And we do not have a credible democracy in the sense that we fail to capture the imagination, capture the interest as to why people should vote for us. And that's a problem, sir. And it's something that should not be allowed to continue. It should be something that all members, irrespective of whether they don't want their competitors to vote for reform or candidate X or Y, we need to go out and really work hard to try and make ourselves relevant so that people think that a cross on a box can actually change something for the benefit. Because clearly, as people don't do that, sir, they don't think we're relevant. And I think we are relevant and we need to be.
Deputy Tadier.
I'm glad Deputy Osoph talked about coming out on a Sunday and voting for Reform Jersey, because that's exactly what we want them to do. I think the advantage of having it on a Sunday, therefore, is that more people are off on a Sunday. Of course, people do work on Sundays. People have to work all days of the year, potentially. But we know that even those who work in retail, certainly in the bigger shops, will be limited between 10 and 4. And I'm presuming that the polling stations will be open as normal from 8 till 8. And I think that needs to continue so that they have time. So that it'd be important that the workers get some time off on a Sunday, and therefore they'll come and vote for the Workers' Party, sir, who are going to provide clearly a comprehensive manifesto that they can get behind. So it's also worth noting that Sundays historically were election days in Jersey anyway. I'm not sure if that was always across the board. Elections used to take place, I understand, whenever there were vacancies, not necessarily, didn't have a general election like we do today. And I'm reminded from the, looking at an extract from Philip Fall's book in 1734, where he talks about the jurat elections taking place after the church service, at which point the results would be announced. So doing things on a Sunday, elections on a Sunday, isn't just what the rest of the world does today, but it's what Jersey has done in the past. And seeing as we're going backwards in many ways in our electoral system, we might as well go back to having elections on a Sunday.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I'm just provoked to speak. Deputy Tadger made a comment about polling station times, and there were comments produced by the committee that raised the prospect of reducing polling station opening hours because of the fact it's on a Sunday, and I just want to state my absolute objection to that. Polling stations should be open for as long as possible. We already have them open for fewer hours than we see in other jurisdictions. Okay, Sunday will be more convenient for many people because they won't be working, but some still will, and we need to be making voting more accessible, not less accessible, and I hope that that idea gets short shrift from those in charge.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes, Deputy Scott.
Sorry, just to say that I'm not convinced completely that this is more convenient for people. A lot of people do vote in and out on the way to work and back. So I'm just, I'll just put it there. I'm not convinced.
Does any other member wish to speak? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon the Chair of PPC to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I thank everybody who's contributed to this debate. Historically, countries that go to the polls on Saturday or Sunday see the highest turnout, to the extent that of some 6% than countries that go to the polls on weekdays. A 2004 study by Mark N. Franklin, Trinity College, Connecticut, entitled Voter Turnout and the Dynamics of Electoral Competition in Established Democracies since 1945, considered 29 countries, and found that when the election was held on a Sunday, participation was higher. In the absence of firm evidence to the contrary, and given voter apathy to date, PPC considers that a move to a Sunday election should be trialled to see if it brings more people to the polls. Our democracy is not going to function well when only a third of eligible voters are participating, and even a modest increase in voting will be worthwhile. Real democracy is when all adults have an equal opportunity to vote. The current weekday poll disadvantages those in full-time employment and young voters who are students. This is reflected in the Jersey Opinions and Lifestyle Survey 2022, conducted after the last elections, which revealed that 53% of over 65s voted, compared to just 17% of those aged 16 to 34. Fewer people work on a Sunday than any other day, and the committee believes that weekend voting will be easier for working people, students and people with families. Early morning voting does not suit many people, often in a rush to get to work, and after a day's work people are not inclined to venture out again to vote. Weekends are normally more leisurely, time management more flexible, and more electors might be nearer their designated polling places at the weekend. Children will be off school and so able to accompany parents to see democracy in action, whilst those empty schools could be used as polling stations without impacting on the school week. I'd just like to turn to Deputy Tadger's point, re a shorter election period. It would make it hard to accommodate things like postal voting and pre-poll, the circulation, the manifesto documents, and the ability to hold hustings for all the positions, deputies, constables, and senators. There needs to be sufficient time to allow all this to happen. Postal voting especially, we can't get the ballot papers printed until we know exactly who is standing, and also for there to be time for people to apply for postal votes and have them sent to them and posted back. I'd like to reassure Deputy Mezek that PPC isn't considering shortening the polling day. And to conclude, I'd just like to say that making access to the polling stations throughout the whole day on a Sunday will benefit those who currently vote the least, and those are the people of working age and students. And finally, to make society more equal and democratic, we need to level the playing field to ensure all ages have equal access to vote. Holding the elections on a Sunday will give all ages greater access to the polls. Sir, I make the proposition and call for the appel.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition is adopted, 42 votes pour, 1 vote contre, 2 abstentions.
Deputy Gorst voted contre and Deputies Luce and Scott abstained.
Well, there is 6 minutes to go before there's the adjournment proposed.
Sir.
Very well. The adjournment is proposed. The Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.